Dove Books on Tape presents The Wolfen by Whitley Strieber. In Brooklyn, they take abandoned cars to the Fountain Avenue Automobile Pound. It occupies land shown on maps as Spring Creek Park. Proposed. There is no spring, no creek, and no park. Normally, the pound is silent, its peace disturbed only by an occasional fight among the packs of wild dogs that roam there, or perhaps the cries of the seagulls that hover over the stinking, smouldering dump nearby. The members of the police auto squad who visit the pound to mark derelicts for the crusher do not consider the place dangerous. Once in a while the foot-long rats will get aggressive and become the victims of target practice. The scruffy little wild dogs will also attack every so often, but they can usually be dealt with by a shot into the ground. It isn't the kind of work that men associate with danger, much less getting killed. So Hugh DeFalco and Dennis Houlihan would have laughed in your face if you told them they had only 3 minutes to live when they heard the first sound behind them. "What was that?" Houlihan asked. He was bored, and wouldn't have minded getting a couple of shots off at a rat. "A noise." "Brilliant. That's what I thought it was, too." The men laughed. Then there was another sound, a staccato growl that ended on a murmuring high note. From ahead came rustlings, and more of the unusual growls. DeFalco and Houlihan stopped. They weren't afraid, only curious. There didn't seem to be any danger on this dripping autumn afternoon, but there was something out there. As both men realized that something had surrounded them, they had their first twinge of concern. They now had less than 1 minute of life remaining. Both of them lived with the central truth of police work. It could happen any time. But what the hell was happening now? Then something stepped gingerly from between two derelicts and stood facing the victims. The men were not frightened, but they sensed danger. Dennis Houlihan felt a shiver of prickles come over him, as if the hair all over his body was standing up. "Don't move, man," DeFalco said. It snarled at the voice. "There's more of 'em behind us, buddy." Their voices were low and controlled, the tone of professionals in trouble. They moved closer together. Their shoulders touched. Both men knew that one of them had to turn around, the other keep facing this way. But they didn't need to talk about it. They had worked together too long to have to plan their moves. DeFalco started to make the turn and draw his pistol. That was the mistake. 10 seconds later, their throats were being torn out. 20 seconds later, the life was pulsing out of their bodies. 30 seconds later, they were being systematically consumed. Neither man had made a sound. Houlihan had seen the one in front of them twitch its eyes. Then there was a searing pain in his throat, and he was suddenly, desperately struggling for air through the bubbling torrent of his own blood. DeFalco's hand had just gripped the butt of his revolver when he was yanked violently aside. Something slammed into his chest, and he too was bleeding. His body slumped to the ground, and his mind sank into darkness. The attackers moved almost too swiftly, their speed born of nervousness at the youth of their victims. Their shirts were torn open, the entrails tugged out and taken away, the precious organs swallowed. The rest was left behind. In less than 5 minutes, it was over. The hollow, ravaged corpses lay there in the mud, 2 ended lives, now food for the wild scavengers of the area. Night fell. Rats worried the corpses until dawn. The 2 men had been listed AWOL for 14 hours, most unusual for these guys. They were both family types, steady and reliable, but still, what could happen to 2 experienced policemen on duty at the auto pound? Police work might be dangerous, but nobody seriously believed that DeFalco and Houlihan were in any real trouble. Nobody realized that the world had just become a much more dangerous place, and they wouldn't understand that for quite some time. Right now, the mystery began and ended with 4 cops poking through the auto pound for signs of their buddies. A cop screamed. The sound stunned the other three to silence because it was one they rarely heard. "Over here," the rookie called in a choking voice. The other three converged, and when the older men got there, the rookie slumped against a car. "Call the hell in, get Homicide out here, seal the area, Jesus Christ." They covered the remains with their rain slickers. They put their hats where the faces had been. 10 minutes after the initial alarms had gone out, the phone was ringing in the Brooklyn Homicide Division. Detective Becky Neff picked it up. "Neff," the gruff voice of the inspector said, "you and Wilson's assigned to the case at the Fountain Avenue dump. Got a double cop killing, mutilation, probable sex assault, cannibalism. Get the hell out there fast." The line clicked. "Wake up, George, we've got a case," Neff growled. "We got a bad one. Somebody killed 2 cops and cannibalized them." Wilson got to his feet. "Where's the scene?" "Fountain Avenue dump." "Goddamn out-of-the-way place. Guys must have gotten themselves jumped." They went outside to Becky's old blue Pontiac and set the flasher on the dashboard as she pulled out into the dense traffic. "Step on it, Becky. I'm stepping." She wanted to snap at him, but she understood how he felt. Cop killings made you hate the world, and the damn city in particular. After the better part of an hour, they arrived at the 75th Street precinct. The 75th was the kind of precinct you never read about in the papers, the kind of place where policemen lived out good, solid careers without ever shooting a man, not the kind of place where they got killed, much less mutilated and cannibalized. In the distance, the flashes could be seen that marked the official vehicles at the pound, the scene of the crime. And judging from the news cars careening down the street, it wasn't going to be an obscure place much longer. "Whose precinct, Captain?" Neff asked. Wilson was the senior man on the team, a fact he was careful to make sure she never forgot. "Girardi, I think." "This sounds like a psycho case to me," Neff said. She was careful to pick her words when she theorized around Wilson. He was scathing when he heard poorly thought-out ideas, but was probably the best detective in Homicide, maybe the best on the force. He was also lazy, venal, inclined toward a Victorian view of women, and a profound slob. Except for their abilities in the craft of police detection, Becky liked to think that they had nothing in common. She and Wilson didn't exactly dislike each other. It was more like pure hatred, laced with grudging respect. Neff thought that Wilson was a Stone Age chauvinist and was revolted by the clerical role he often forced her to play, and he considered her a female upstart in a profession where women were at best a mistake. But they were both exceptional detectives, and that kept them together. Neff couldn't help but admire her partner's work, and he had been forced to admit that she was one of the few officers who could keep up with him. The fact that Becky Neff was also not a bad-looking 34 had helped as well. Wilson was a bachelor, over 50, and not much more appealing than a busted refrigerator, which he resembled in shape and height. But Becky's husband, Dick, was also on the force, a captain in narcotics, and Wilson wouldn't mess around with another cop's wife. The idea of Wilson messing around with anybody was ridiculous anyway. He had remained a bachelor partly out of choice, and partly because few women would tolerate his arrogance. "Let's just go blank on this one, sweetheart," Wilson rumbled. "We don't know what the hell happened out there." They got out of the car and trudged over to where the Klieg's now lit the scene of the murders. As soon as she saw the mess, she knew this was no normal case. Something that made you break out in a sweat had happened to these men. Even Wilson was wide-eyed with surprise. "Jesus," he said. "I mean, what?" The captain came forward. "We don't know, sir," he said, acknowledging Wilson's seniority and fame on the force. He also eyed Becky Neff, well known enough in her own right as one of the most visible female officers in New York. She was highly conscious of her role as living proof that female officers could work the front lines as well as their male counterparts. Taking a deep breath, she knelt down beside the corpses. She looked closely, peering at the broken, gristle-covered bones and dark lumps of flesh. "Where the hell's the medical examiner?" Wilson said behind her. Wilson didn't come any closer. She knew that he couldn't stomach this sort of thing. Clenching her teeth against her disgust, she stared at the bodies, noting the long scrape marks on the exposed bones and the evidence of gnawing. She stood up and looked around the desolate spot. They were gnawed by rats, Becky said, in as level a tone as she could manage. But those larger marks indicate something else. Dogs? Oh, the wild dogs around here are just scrawny mutts, the captain said. They were interrupted by the arrival of a helicopter carrying the commissioner and the chief. At the same time, the medical examiner was hurrying over. "It's Evans himself," Wilson said. "Whew, I haven't seen that man outdoors in 20 years. Evans was renowned for his ingenious feats of forensic detection and had worked with Wilson and Neff often. "What's your idea?" Evans said even before examining the bodies. He respected these two. "We're going to have trouble because of the shape they're in." Evans rolled on his black rubber gloves, bent down and examined the bodies closely, probing gingerly at the corpses. When he backed away, his face registered confusion. "I don't understand. These men have been killed by something with claws, teeth. But why didn't they defend themselves?" "Yet their guns aren't even drawn," Becky said. It was the first thing she had noticed. "Maybe they were killed first and then eaten by the animals around here." The doctor nodded. "We'll find out when we do the autopsy. But on the surface, I'd say we're looking at the fatal wounds." The captain broke the silence. "You're saying these guys were killed by wild dogs and they didn't even draw their guns? Anybody hear of a death from wild dogs in the city?" The chief and the commissioner were now standing nearby, shivering. It was obvious that they wanted to get back into the comfort of headquarters as soon as they could. "We'll give you whatever you need to solve this case," the commissioner said. He stared at the bodies. "Cover 'em up and get 'em out of here." The two officials trudged back to their helicopter. The medical examiner was still thinking. If it was dogs, they'd have to be 70, 80 pounds or more, and fast. Look at DeFalco's right wrist, torn. He was going for his pistol when something with teeth hit his arm hard. Whatever it was damn fast. Becky thought immediately of the dogs her husband Dick often worked with on the narcotics squad. "Attack dogs," she said. "You're describing the work of attack dogs." The doctor shrugged. "Now, I'm describing the condition of the bodies. How they got that way, it's your business, Becky." "Well, if we can establish that attack dogs did this," she said, "then we can narrow our search considerably. Most attack dogs don't kill." "Yeah, you've got a point," Wilson said. "Let's talk to Tom Rilke, get ourselves a little education on the subject." Rilke trained dogs for the department. They headed back toward their car. Once inside, Wilson began to recite what he remembered about cases involving killer dogs. October 1966, a pedestrian killed by a dog in Queens, an accident. July 1970, an attacked dog escaped in Long Island and killed a 17-year-old boy, another accident. April 1973, our only proven murder by dog. A hood was torn apart by 3 dogs, later traced to a front for the Carlo Midi family. I almost netted Midi in that one, but the brass removed me from the case. Corrupt bastards. That's my inventory on dogs. You got anything? I don't remember any dog cases since I've been a detective. But the scuttlebutt was that you got paid off on the Midi case. Wilson turned silent. She realized she shouldn't have goaded him. Wilson was one honest cop. That much was certain. He hated corruption in others and certainly would never bend himself. She tried to apologize, but he wouldn't acknowledge it. She changed the subject. "My husband works with the dogs all the time. They're his best weapon," he says. "Yeah, I've heard about his dogs. They get so excited they just happen to kill the jerk they find the dope on sometimes. But I guess your husband's told you all about that." "Oh, let's drop it, Wilson." But Becky had heard the rumors he was referring to. At least he's not on the take, Becky thought. I hope to God he's not. Then she thought of a problem they used to have, paying for his father's nursing home. A problem that seemed to have disappeared. Yeah, but she refused to think about it. Corruption was the one thing about police work she hated. You did your job and you got your pay. That ought to be enough. But Becky refused to rise to Wilson's bait. Part of the reason he was like this was because she had forced herself on him. Between her husband Dick and her Uncle Bob, she had exerted plenty of pull to get herself into Homicide, out of the secretary syndrome and onto the street. And here came Becky Neff, just when George Wilson's most recent partner had punched him in the face and transferred out. Wilson had to take what he could get, and in this situation, it was a rookie detective, and worse, a woman. For the first 6 weeks, he had said no more than a word a week to her. He had schemed to get her out of the division, but gradually she had become better until even he had been forced to acknowledge it. Soon they were making collars pretty often. In fact, they were getting a reputation. "Women are mostly awful cops," were his final words on the subject. "But you're unique. Instead of being awful, you're just bad." Coming from him, it was a compliment. She stopped at the 75th Precinct and hurried inside to get the photographs and copies of the print taken at the scene. She returned to the car with a box of plaster casts and a dozen glossies under her arm. She pulled out into the traffic and lit another cigarette. Smoking was the one pleasure she had begun to enjoy since the doctor had made Wilson stop. His response was prompt. "You're polluting." She wished that she smoked cigars. Tom Rilke stared at the pictures. His face registered disbelief and what looked to Becky like fear. "This is impossible," he finally said. "Why is that?" Wilson asked. "Well, see, a dog wouldn't do this. You'd have to train it. These men have been gutted, for God's sake. You can train a dog to kill, but to do this, well, you just have to train it very, very well. You'd need human models for the dog to work on if you wanted it to be reliable." He picked up the paw prints and shook his head. "These all the prints? Now, how big a dog would it have taken?" "A monster. Something big and fast and mean enough to accept this kind of training. Something close to the wild huskies, German shepherds. In all my years, I've never seen anything like this done by dogs." He grabbed a cast of some of the paw prints and peered at it. "These are not dog prints." "Well, what are they then?" "I don't know. Something very strange. These prints have the circules, like human hands and feet. But they are clearly paw prints." "Some kind of animal other than a dog?" "I'm sorry to tell you that no animal has prints like this. In fact, nothing does. Nothing I've ever heard of, that is, in 50 years of working with animals." Becky had to say it. "Werewolves?" Surprisingly, Rilke took some time to dismiss the question. "I don't think such things are possible," he said carefully. "Well, are they or aren't they?" Becky realized he was being kind. I don't believe in werewolves either, Mr. Rilke. Frankly, I wanted to know if you did." "Why?" "Because if you had, well, we wouldn't have to trust the rest of what you were saying. As it is, you look like a creditable expert who's just given us a very nasty problem." Wilson piped in. "We now must proceed under the assumption that these 2 fully armed police officers were killed by animals. Okay, that's not so good. But we've also got to assume that the animals are of an unknown species. That's pretty bad. And now we've got to believe that this unknown species of man-killing animals is running free in Brooklyn, and nobody knows about it. Now that I cannot accept. Come on, Becky. We've got real work to do." "Wait a minute, Detective. I'm not sure I like your tone. I'll call a friend up at the Museum of Natural History. He'll tell you these prints weren't made by any known animal. You're dealing with something highly unusual. That's for damn sure. This guy'll tell you bastards I'm right." Wilson jerked his head toward the door. "We don't need any help from a museum," he muttered, and they headed out to the car. They headed to the office of the chief medical examiner, where the autopsies were due to start in half an hour. Becky could not dispel the growing feeling of fear that this case was giving her. She kept imagining the two cops out there in the drizzle facing whatever in the name of God they had faced, and dying with the secret. She took her cases very personally. It was one of her worst failings, and also the reason she was often so successful, she felt. This one was going to be unusually hard on her. You're muttering. I am not. I'm telling you this case is going to eat away at you. It's eating at me is the reason I say that. He was silent for a moment. It scares me. Never before had Wilson said such a thing. Me too, she said. It's a weird case. They remained silent until they arrived at the Evans office. Let's go up and watch old Prickface pretend to be a master sleuth. Oh, Wilson, why don't you let the poor man alone? They continued their argument until they reached the medical examiner's office. I thought you people didn't come back here unless you were invited, Evans growled. This is the man who invites us on his cases. How sweet. Come on in if you want to, but I warn you, they're fragrant. The two bodies lay on tables under merciless lights. There was none of the confusion of the scene at the auto pound. Here, everything was neat and orderly, except the bodies themselves, which carried their violence and horror with them. Becky was struck by the sheer damage. This attack had been so unbelievably savage. It was somehow reassuring. Nothing from nature would do this. It had to be the work of humans. It was too terrible to be anything else. The forensic lab hasn't found a single thing except dog hairs, rat hairs, and feathers, Dr. Evans said mildly. Okay, Wilson said. But he took the information like a blow. It was not good news. Evans picked up a scalpel and took a series of tissue samples. The autopsy proceeded swiftly. There was pitifully little to examine. We're hunting for signs of poison, suffocation, anything that would give us a more plausible cause of death, Evans said as he worked. Look at this. He held up a sharp white tooth. Embedded in that busted wrist. It confirms that he was alive when the dogs attacked him. There was a long silence. Wilson seemed to sink into himself. Becky felt a dull powerlessness. The detectives returned to the M.E.'s office before the autopsies were completed. What do you think Chief Underwood will do? Becky asked. Wilson shrugged. 2 cops got killed by some kinds of dogs. It's pretty flimsy. I think we've got to keep digging. Somehow or other we'll uncover a real motive and a real crime. But if it was dogs, and we don't act fast, there could be more deaths. Evans entered carrying a clipboard. Lab said we might have carbon monoxide poisoning as a secondary factor, he said, but the basic cause of death was the injuries. Carbon monoxide? Could they have been impaired by it? Not likely. The levels are very low, about what you have in you right now. These guys were functioning normally when they were hit. It's just the only other thing. He shook his head. This is the strangest case I have worked on in my entire career. Wilson picked up the phone. I'm calling Underwood to tell him we're on the way. He muttered into the phone. Then they left the building. Underwood was not alone in his office. With him was a young man, Assistant D.A. Kupferman. Underwood introduced Neff and Wilson, then got right to business. I've told the papers we'd have a statement tonight. Was that right? Yeah, Wilson said. Kupferman said, I want to know if you found out anything about those guys that might justify us getting into the act. Ah, so that's what he was here for. He was the DA's watchdog, sent here to sniff out any departmental wrongdoing. And maybe the 2 dead cops were bent. Maybe that's why they were dead. There's nothing like that, Wilson said. We've just now established a cause of death. Underwood leaned forward. It was the dogs, Wilson said. I can't have that, Underwood snapped. That's completely unacceptable. Let the damn commissioner put that in the press releases. It's his responsibility. The way he backed off would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. He'd called them down here hoping to get some glory thrown his way when they solved the crime, but now it looked like this. He wasn't so eager to be associated with it. The only thing out of the ordinary was some residual carbon monoxide, Becky said. Now that's better. Why didn't you tell me that? They were out cold. No, the CO count wasn't high enough, Wilson mumbled. It's an angle, man. If I can use that, the case won't go down to the unexplained. Cops killed by dogs. I mean, that's stupid. I can't make a statement like that. Have you considered the consequences, sir? Becky said. She had. And the statement Underwood planned to make was a serious mistake, even a dangerous one. If the men were conscious, she continued, and we know they were, well, it means we've got something very dangerous out there. Yeah, but that's no problem, because I intend to order that dump cleared of wild dogs. I'm going to say that the officers were suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, and they were attacked by the dogs while they were semi-conscious. And, as of right now, you're off the case. Becky was astonished. This had never happened to them before. Being pulled off this case was a blow to Wilson's prestige and to hers. It won't last, Underwood, Wilson said quietly. This thing isn't going to go away. Something damn strange happened out there. Oh, nothing we can't deal with. Unlike you can't seem to put this case together. Dogs, indeed. Oh, that's ludicrous. He glared at Becky. And another thing, sweetheart. I've heard the rumors about your sweet husband. The DA ought to be doing a little investigating into the Neff family. We've got a bent cop's wife right here. Or is it a family affair, dear? At the chief's words, the whole room seemed to sway. Becky felt her heart thundering. What in God's name was he implying? Was Dick in trouble? Dick had to be honest. Like Wilson. You think we're incompetent? Wilson said mildly. Why not convene a board of inquiry? Shut up and get out of here now. They left. I'm going home, Becky said to her boss as they headed toward the garage. When she arrived at their small apartment, Becky was disappointed that Dick wasn't there. Mechanically, she played back the phone mate. Dick said he'd be in at 3 a.m. Great. A lonely night just when you need it the least. At 11, the chief appeared with his statement, carbon monoxide, wild dogs, case closed in 1 day. The hell it is, she thought. The hell it is. Mike O'Donnell hated this part of his daily journey. The streets around here were sullen, dangerous, and empty. Along this route he'd encountered addicts, muggers, perverts, and he had survived. Mike was tough and resilient. 60 sightless years in the Bronx left him no other choice. He and his beloved daughter were on welfare, home relief. She was a good girl, with bad taste in husbands. He groped along with his cane, trying to put trouble out of his mind, not wanting to bring troubles home. Then he heard a sound that made the hairs rise along the back of his neck. Not quite animal. Too much like a voice. Too little like a growl. Is somebody there? He sensed a presence. Something slid along the pavement. At once the sound was taken up from other points. There was a sense of slow, circling movement. Mike O'Donnell swung his cane back and forth in front of him. The reaction was immediate. His death came so suddenly that all he registered was astonishment. They worked with practiced efficiency, pulling the body back into the abandoned building while blood was still pumping out of the throat. They worked against time, against the danger of being discovered at a vulnerable moment. Mike O'Donnell hadn't understood how completely this neighborhood had been abandoned in recent years, left by all except derelicts, and the ones attracted to them for their weakness. And now Mike O'Donnell had joined the unnumbered corpses rotting in the abandoned basements and rubble of the empty neighborhood. But in his case, there was one small difference. He had a home and was missed. Mike's daughter was frantic. She dialed the lighthouse for the blind again. No, they hadn't seen Mike. Now it was 6 hours, and she wasn't going to waste any more time. Her next call was to the police. A description of Mike O'Donnell was circulated, a map drawn of his probable route from his apartment to the subway station. No body turned up, so the police told the daughter to wait, not to give up hope. A week later, they told her he wasn't going to be found. She did the best she could, but all she understood was that her father had somehow been swallowed up by the city. During these weeks, Neff and Wilson worked on other assignments. They heard nothing about the O'Donnell case. They were locked in the endless, sordid routine of homicide. The first words Becky Neff heard about Mike O'Donnell came from the medical examiner. "So I've got a problem up here, and I'd like you two to take a look at it. Yeah, but the chief... no, so take a coffee break. Just come up here." Neff and Wilson pulled on their coats, not speaking as the car raced up 3rd Avenue. They'd been silent for the past few weeks. Becky worrying about Dick. She knew now that he was taking money under the table. Not from narcotics, but from gambling. He had tracked a heroin network into an illicit gambling casino about a year ago. Dick's father was in a nursing home. He was sick of the bills, sick of the treadmill. He collared the junkies but left the casino alone, for a few $1,000s. It hurt Becky to see this happening to Dick. The truth was, she had sniped at him for it, but she hadn't tried to stop him, and she hadn't turned him in, nor would she. But now they bickered, each unwilling to confront the real reason for their anger. They should have had the courage to stop. Instead, they had let things happen. They had disappointed one another and were bitter about it. Eventually, there would be a confrontation, but not now. Not today. Evans was waiting for them in the reception area. He led them to the freezer, which meant that the remains were in an advanced state of deterioration. It's rough stuff again. 3 DOAs, very decomposed. He pulled the door open, and it was clear the bodies had been attacked the same way DeFalco and Houlihan were attacked. Becky was frightened. She knew that the chief of detectives had made exactly the mistake they had feared he was making. This was not an ordinary murder case, and it was not a fluke. "God damn," Wilson said. "I don't know how to explain these bodies," Evans said. "It makes sense," Becky said, "as soon as you assume that they weren't killed by human beings." "That's what's to be found out," Wilson said, "but Underwood took us off the case." Evans opened the door. "You'll get back on," he said. "I'll make sure of that. Now start to work. You need a solution." Wilson called the precinct where the bodies had been found, and he and Neff made their way across town. "Goddamn brass," Becky growled. "Damn those politicking bastards. It's a black day when the NYPD won't even mount a proper investigation when officers are killed." Wilson sighed, expressing in that sound all the feelings he couldn't express about the department he so loved to hate. As they approached the vacant lots, the burned, abandoned ruins, Becky thought, somewhere, something is here. It is here. And by the way Wilson stiffened, she saw that he also had the same feeling. The captain of the 41st Precinct looked up from his desk when Neff and Wilson were shown in. It was clear he didn't like a case being taken from him without a good reason, and it was obvious that nobody had yet given him one. Evans pulled rank on the Bronx Medical Examiner and got those cadavers down to Manhattan. We don't know why he did that. He did that because the marks on them were similar to the marks on the DeFalco Houlihan remains. The captain stared. "Jesus, no wonder you guys are all over us," he stood. "You want to go over to the scene?" Wilson nodded, and they headed out. The area where the bodies had been found was roped off, guarded by 2 patrolmen. The bodies had been found in the basement of an abandoned apartment house. Becky took her flashlight and went in. Lights had been set up, but the rest of the building was in darkness. The flashlight played along the floor, up the stairs that led to the first floor. "Haven't been up there," the captain said. "Well, let's go up, partner," Wilson said. "We might as well make the search." They all heard it. A footstep on the stair. They looked to their leader. His hair rose, and theirs did too. They functioned with one emotion, one will. Obviously, the ones in the basement had decided to come upstairs, and they were familiar. Their rising smell, their voices remembered from the dump. As the elders had feared, the killings of young humans had caused an investigation, and these too had been at that investigation, and now they were here, obviously following the pack. The scent became more powerful. An old man and a young woman. Oh, no danger. They would be an easy kill. The leader made a sound that sent the pack into motion. They were hungry, and food was needed. This kill would both remove danger and provide meat. But the strong young woman would have to be separated from the weak old man. Now, how to do that? The sense became sharp with fear as the two humans groped through the darkness. The leader warned, "Hold back, hold back." He sensed hidden dangers. Oh, suddenly he hated the place. It was thick with humanity. He found himself moving slowly toward the door of the room they inhabited, attracted by the need to kill the two who knew enough of the pack to follow it here. The others moved behind him, down the black stairway toward the wonderful sense. The leader thought carefully, his mind turning over the problem and coming to the solution. Certain sounds attracted humans. This fact was often used in hunting. A little cry, like one of their children, would bring even the most fearful within range of attack. And the child's cry was the most easily heard by the women. Shh! What? Listen. It came again, the unmistakable groan of a child. Did you hear that? No. Becky went to the stairwell. "Wilson, there's a kid up there." "So go investigate. I'm not going up there." The sound came again, full of imperative need. She found herself standing on the first step, moving upward, almost against her own will. Above her, the decoy put his heart into the sounds, imagining himself a helpless little human child weeping, and the sound that came out was like such a child. The others moved swiftly to the opposite stairwell and started down. As Becky reached one landing, the hunters reached its twin at the opposite end of the hall. As they got closer to Wilson, they became more careful. Hidden strength under the smells of fear and decay. They would have to hit this man with devastating force. Oh, but the prize! Oh, it would be great. He was heavy and well-fed. Unlike the ones they'd found among these empty buildings, oh, they loved him, lusted after him, moved closer to him. Then he was standing in a flicker of light. "What are you doing, George?" "Lighting a goddamn cigarette." Becky came toward him. "You are lighting a cigarette. Is this a special occasion?" He nodded. "Yeah, well, I'll be frank with you, Becky. I got the creeps. I'm scared to death. We ought to leave now." "But there's a child." "Now. Come on." He pulled her toward the basement door. Downstairs he told the captain of the noises. "Well, I'll order up a search party," the man said. "It'll take 10 men with carbines. I think that ought to do it." Becky acknowledged the wisdom of this plan. No doubt there had been a pack of junkies at the top of the stairs waiting to jump her. Even if there was a child, the 10 minutes it would take to assemble the search party would make little difference. They went outside and got into their car, settling in for the warmth. For this reason, they did not hear the howl of rage that rose from the tenement, nor did they see the exodus that took place, a line of gray shadows jumping one by one across the space that separated this building from the next. It didn't take long to assemble the search party. Of course, you could assume that any junkies in the building had already slipped out the back, but murder had been done here, and it was worth a thorough search. Wilson and Neff went with the officers, floor to floor. They looked carefully in all the rooms, but found nothing except some fecal matter, which was bagged for analysis. When they got back to the basement, Wilson was shaking his head. "I don't get it. I know we heard something." "You too? Well, why didn't you go up with me then?" It wasn't a child. She looked at him, at the cold fear in his face. "Okay, what was it?" He shook his head again. Let's get the shit to the lab for the analysis. That's all we can do for now." They headed back to Manhattan. "You think this will reopen the DeFalco case?" "Probably." "Good." "Yeah. We're going to be the scapegoats now. Neff and Wilson close case. New evidence come in, case reopened. Neff and Wilson scapegoats for closing it in the first place. If it gets out that Underwood himself closed the case, he'll lose his shot at commissioner. Therefore, you and yours truly are going to be blamed." Becky was silent a moment. "Who do you think is doing it, then?" "Not who. What? It's not human." Now he had said the words they had previously been unwilling to face. "What makes you so sure?" Becky asked, half knowing the answer. Wilson looked at her in surprise. "Why, the noise, of course. It wasn't human. It sounded perfectly human to me. Or had it? Every few seconds, it was as if Becky heard it again. Horrible, inhuman parody, full of snarling menace. Then the child again, soft, wounded, dying. "Look out!" She slammed on the brakes. She had almost glided broadside into the traffic of 3rd Avenue. "You'll pull over. You're not in good shape." She obeyed. "You acted hypnotized," he said. She felt cold, her flesh crawling, thinking of the terrible danger that had been waiting for her. The same that had faced the torn, bloodied corpses, the jagged bones and skulls. She fought not to scream, to give up completely to the terror. Wilson came across the seat as if he had been waiting for this. He took her in his arms. She pressed her face into the warm, scruffy smell of his shirt, felt him kissing her hair, her ear, her neck, and felt waves of comfort and surprise pushing back the panic. She wanted to pull away from him, but she also wanted to do what she did, which was to lift her face. He kissed her hard, and she accepted it, then, giving in to the relief of it, and kissed him back. Then they separated. Becky felt sick and sad, as if something had just been lost. "Well, I've been waiting to get that out of my system," Wilson said gruffly. "I've been—" Then his voice died away. He clutched the dashboard and laid his head on his arm. "Oh, hell. I love you, damn it. No, don't say it. But just let it be known and leave it like that. We'll go on like we were. Unrequited love won't kill me." She looked at him, amazed that he could bring up something so extraneous. She'd always wondered if he loved her. She loved him, in a way, but it wasn't important. Their relationship had been established. "What happened to me?" she asked. "What was going on back there?" "Becky, I don't know. But you were rattled. You shouldn't be. You weren't the one in danger. It was me." "You?" "I was being lured upstairs to get you away from me. I heard noises on the stairs, like something hungry slathering over its food." She laughed nervously. "You're the last person I'd think of as one of their victims. Why? Everyone they've hit, old men, junkies, 2 cops in a lonely place, the weak and the isolated. I fit 2 criteria. Older man, isolated from all, except you. And they damn near lured you upstairs. You ever go hunting?" "No, I don't like it. I've never been." "When I was a kid, I hunted with my father. One summer, we finally got onto our moose, a big old bull, wounded, ready for the slaughter. Oh, I'll never forget it. We were just getting ready to shoot when wolves stole out of the shadows all around us toward the moose. That big moose looked down at those scrawny wolves and just snorted. You'd never believe it. The damn wolves wagged their tails, and the moose let out a great roar, and they jumped him. We were fascinated. It was like they agreed that the killing be done. They couldn't take it anymore. They needed meat, so he let them take him. They'd never be able to bring down a full-grown bull moose unless he agreed to let them try. Oh, what's that supposed to mean? I'm the bull moose. I wasn't scared, but I knew they were coming down those stairs. If they had gotten any closer, I think I would have been a goner. But you didn't want them to kill you? No, I don't know what was going on in my mind. By the choked gruffness in his voice, she knew if he hadn't been Wilson, he would be sobbing. All I know is, if they had come any closer, I'm not sure I could have even tried to stop them. Becky Neff awoke suddenly out of a restless sleep. She felt there had been a noise, yet all was silent. Dick's steady breathing was a reassurance. If there had been a noise, he would be awake too. She leaned over to get her cigarettes, then froze. There was a shadow on the ceiling. She watched it slowly move along like something crawling on its belly across the terrace. A little sound from the terrace made her mind go blank. It was a growl, very low and indistinct. They were here. Somehow they'd done the impossible, had followed her here. They were hunting her down. Oh, this was fear, she knew, so intense that it left her mind floating above her body. She woke Dick. Look, don't make a sound. Something's outside. He slipped his revolver out of the nightstand and very quietly got up and went to the door. He moved quickly, pulling back the curtains and stepping outside. The terrace was empty. Nothing's here. There was something, she was convinced. What? I don't know. Some kind of animal. He came back to bed. Oh, you're really wound up in this case, aren't you, honey? The gentleness of his voice made her want to embrace him, but she stayed on her side of the bed. It's a strange case, Dick. He laughed, condescending. Take it easy, kid. Take a Valium if you're upset. Oh, the man was infuriating. They drove in silence. I'm telling you, George, I know what the hell I saw. Well, it's pretty hard to believe. 16 stories is a long way up. His eyes were pleading. She had to be wrong, or else they would be dealing with a force of completely unmanageable proportions. Well, he continued, we'll know better when we go see this kook that Tom Rilke wants us to see. You remember the guy with the dogs? She nodded. He's an animal stuffer or something at the Museum of Natural History. The fact that they were even trying this angle testified to their increasing desperation, but at least it was better than letting more time slip by, and time seemed to be terribly important. A tall young man in a dirty grey smock appeared from behind a box of stuffed owls. I'm Carl Ferguson, he said cheerily. Let's go into my office. I've got something to show you. It sat on the desk on a piece of plastic. Ever see anything like it? Well, what the hell is it? It's a composite I constructed from the paw print cast Tom Rilke gave me. Whatever made those prints has paws very much like this one. My God, it looks so lethal. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. An efficient weapon, one of the best I've ever seen in nature, as a matter of fact. He picked it up. These long, jointed toes can grasp, I think, quite well, and the claw retracts. He shook his head. Only one thing wrong with it. Which is? Oh, it can't exist. It's too perfect a mutation. Plus, it's at least 3 steps ahead of its canine ancestors. Maybe as a single mutation it would be acceptable, but there are the prints of 5 or 6 different animals in here. There must be a pack of these things. The odds against this are billions, or to trillions, to 1. But not impossible. He held the model out to Wilson. We have the evidence right here, and I want to know more about the creatures that made these prints. That's why I called you. Well, that's very nice, Wilson said, but we can't help you. You've just told us a lot more than we knew. You're the one who can answer questions. The scientist looked puzzled and a little sad. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But where did the prints come from? Can you tell me that? Becky stepped in. The scene of the DeFalco Houlihan murders in Brooklyn. They were found all around the bodies. Oh, what's being done about this? Exactly nothing, Wilson snapped. But here's clear evidence that something out of the ordinary is at work. This is no dog or wolf paw, you realize that. Surely somebody must be doing something about it. That's why we're here, Doctor. We are the only 2 police officers in New York on this case, and we're about to be reassigned. Now, don't you understand? This claw belongs to a fearsome killer. He said it like it was a revelation. No, we know, Becky replied patiently. In her mind's eye, she once again saw the faces of the dead. Dr. Ferguson grew pale. How many have died? 5 so far that we know about, Wilson replied. There've probably been more, Ferguson said faintly. Maybe many more, if what I suspect is right. Which is? He frowned. Oh, I can't say right now. If I'm wrong, it could harm my career, but we could be dealing with some kind of murderer's hoax. You know, Wilson drawled, you shouldn't clam up on us. If you don't tell us what you think, we aren't going to be able to help you. Listen, you're talking confidentially to 2 New York City policemen. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating. So, come on, tell us your theory. For God's sake, help us. Wilson barked the words, and then he said more softly, I guess I'm a little upset. You see, we're the only ones who even suspect what we're up against. And we've had some bad experiences. Becky broke in. See, these things don't just kill, they hunt. They nearly got us in a house in the Bronx a few days ago. One of them tried to lure me while the others stalked me. They tried to separate us. And I think they might have been outside my apartment last night. The words had come out in a rush. Now Ferguson was looking at them with unabashed horror, almost as if they themselves bore some loathsome mark. No, you must be mistaken. They can't be as intelligent as all that. Becky stopped. She had never realized that. Not only were they deadly, they were smart. They had to understand who their enemy was and know the importance of destroying him before they revealed their presence to the world. Wilson spoke like a man in a dream. No matter what you say, Dr. Ferguson, it happened. You know something? I'll bet they didn't pop out of the ground yesterday either. They know how to stay well hidden. They know how important that is, too. That's my thought. Well, that's pretty much the theory I didn't want to tell you. You see, you've got to get me a cranium or a head, though. Then I can give you an idea of the intelligence. But don't worry about it. I'm sure we're much smarter. Doctor, what would a chimp be like if it had the senses of a dog? Well, lethal. Oh, God, I see what you mean. It's very disturbing, the idea of canine senses and a primate brain. And it's more than that, Wilson leaned forward, burning with violence and pain. She was hunted, and we don't know what the hell we're confronting. See, and I can't help you unless I've got more information. If I'm going to give you answers, I've got to have a head. Wilson hunched over. Nobody ever caught one of these things, even if they've evolved at absolute top speed. How long can they have been around? Well, at the very least, give them 10,000 years. Longer than recorded history, and you want us to bring you ahead? Okay, let's go, Detective Neff. We've got work to do. Just one more thing, Becky said as she was leaving. Just one thing I'd like you to think about. If they are following us, they probably know we came to see you. She followed Wilson, leaving the scientist staring at the door. Wilson was silent until they were in the car. That schmuck won't believe us, no matter how close to home you try to take it. Maybe not, but it sure would help us to get a Ph.D. to talk to Underwood and say we have a point. Wilson was silent. Oh, maybe we're spooked. Maybe it was our imagination. Our? You see, I saw something too. Something watched me from a fire escape when I was on my way home. It was a damn strange-looking dog. I've never seen a face like that on a dog, so intense. In fact, I've never seen a face like that except once, when I collared a maniac about to pull a hidden shiv on me. Oh, why didn't you say something earlier? I was hoping it was my imagination. I guess we're in trouble, Becky. This last he said softly. They both knew exactly what the stakes were. Wilson, sitting there solid as a statue, had never seemed so frail. George, I just can't believe it. It's happened before, Becky. There are even legends about it. What are you driving at? I was thinking, you remember what you said to Rilke about werewolves? You might not have been too far wrong. Oh, that's ridiculous. No, not really. They've existed throughout recorded history. If they really are as smart as we think, people in the past would have believed they were men turned into wolves. Then what happened? Why did the legends die out? Wilson slumped in the seat. Maybe because the population of the world grew. In the past, their hunts were noticed because there were so few people. But as the population got bigger, they started concentrating on the dregs, people who wouldn't be missed. Typical predators in that respect. They only take the weak. Well, I think that's a hell of an idea, she said. I don't think it's very good news for you or me, though. He laughed. We're not weak. That probably means they'll be very careful. They also must be very thorough about covering their tracks. He means they hunt down people like us, Becky thought. Her mind kept going back to the shadow on the ceiling, waiting for the single, perfect instant when it could destroy the woman who knew its secret. It's a shame nobody believes us, Wilson said. I mean, it's a shame the things are wasting their time hunting us down, seeing how we couldn't reveal them even if we wanted to, except maybe to Rilke and Evans. Hell, I don't care what they decide is after us. I just want them to know we're in danger and give us a hand. They drove in silence the rest of the way to their offices. Becky called Evans and Rilke to try and get them on their side. Wilson didn't offer to make the calls. They both knew that his services were, at best, counterproductive in persuading people. Evans listened to the story. Rilke said he had suspected something like that. Ferguson was willing to attend a meeting with Underwood as long as everything was off the record. Wilson called Underwood and arranged a meeting for 3 o'clock. He and Becky headed to Chinatown for lunch, where there were sure to be crowds, for safety. During lunch they spoke little. Finally Wilson broke the silence. I wonder what it'll feel like. What in the world makes you say something like that? Nothing. Except I just can't get that damn claw out of my mind. Now wait a minute, George. You're getting scared. You cannot afford to be scared. I think the only thing that's kept them from doing it before is the fact that we haven't been scared. Without you, I haven't got any hope at all. Her words surprised her, but she knew them to be true. We'll get through this, she continued. However the hell we can. Now, let me finish my lunch in peace. They went straight to Underwood's office. They were early, but the receptionist, the kind of policewoman Becky most disliked, a typist in uniform, told them Underwood was still in another meeting, with Evans and with someone from the Museum of Natural History. They barged in and sat down. There was a long silence. Evans was a little embarrassed. Becky slumped. It could only mean that they didn't believe them. The two famous detectives were a little off their rockers. Apparently you gentlemen don't know what it is to be hunted, Wilson said. Becky was amazed. When he was up against the wall, he revealed hidden resources. And since you don't know, you can't imagine the state me and Neff are in. He picked up the claw on Underwood's desk. Can you imagine how it would feel to get one of these in the chest, rip your heart right out? Detective Wilson, You're overwrought. Oh, shut up, Underwood. I'm making my last speech, and I want to be heard. He measured his words carefully. We are being hunted by whatever has these claws. They exist. Don't forget that. We have seen them, gentlemen, and they are very smart. People used to call them werewolves. Now they don't call them anything because they've gotten so damn good at covering their tracks that there are no legends left. But they are here. They damn well are here. The two who had to be killed were hard to find. Patience had been needed. The man was watched as he went through the streets, and his house was finally discovered. The woman was also followed, and her scent traced to a building with many stories. It was watched until they knew that the bedroom behind one of the balconies must certainly hold her. They had to be taken. If their knowledge of this pack spread, all the race would suffer. First, the many packs in the city would be hurt, and finally, all, everywhere. Better that man not know of the packs. If the numberless hordes of men knew, they would surely resist. Essential that man not know. Whenever man came close, this was done. It was the first law of caution. There was so much humanity that packs were growing through the world in every one of the human cities. When they were occasionally glimpsed by man, the pack passed as a group of stray dogs. They slept in lairs so carefully concealed that man never realized they were there. Now these two humans had to die, else they go among all the human cities and warn them of the presence of death in their midst. So they had followed their scent through the streets, and when it had split up, they followed both parts. Oh, the man's lair was easy to find. It was close to the ground, with an easily accessible basement. But the man's own room was locked and barred. Oh, the whole place stank of fear. This man lived in a fortress. It was pitiful to see one so sick and full of fear, sitting his nights away in a chair with all the lights in his room on. Such a one needed death, and the pack longed to take him, not only because he was potentially dangerous, but because he was in the condition of prey. He needed death, this one, and they all hoped to give it to him. And they had found a way to move against him. Now, the woman lived far up in her building. Some of the pack were adept climbers, and one of them climbed. He moved from balcony to balcony, grasping with his forepaws. Below him, the rest of the pack stood in the alley, longing to howl their joy at his heroism, at his true love for all of his kind. And he climbed toward the smell of the human woman. He climbed, he longed to reach her, to feel her blood pouring down his throat, to taste the meat of her, to feel the threat to the race ended. He was glad to climb for the pack. When he got to her balcony, he moved as softly as he could, but not softly enough. One of his toenails clicked against the glass door as he tested the lock. Had she heard it? Her scent changed to the sharpness of fear as she had heard him. She knew he was out there. This was dangerous. If they opened the curtain, he would be seen. To avoid that, he was prepared to throw himself off the balcony. Or was he? His own heart began to pound. Now it was too late. They were getting up. Desperately, he climbed up to the next floor, and not a moment too soon. He heard the door scrape. Her male companion looked about and, in the marvelous blindness of humans, did not even notice. These poor creatures were blind in all but the visual sense. They were the best prey in the world. When the man went back inside, he returned to the alley. His heart was full of sorrow. He had failed, but they had found a way to move against her also, and now they were ready. Carl Ferguson had gone back to his office. Outside, the evening darkened. Suddenly he frowned. Wasn't that a noise? I'm getting crazy, he said aloud. He was tired, exhausted. The detectives had babbled about werewolves, superstitious fools. But They certainly had uncovered a problem. Judging from the paw, this animal was on the large side, possibly 180 pounds. Whatever had a paw like this had split off from the canine mainstream a long time ago and had reached a very, very high level of evolution. It was uncanny and chilling to think that a whole subspecies of canine carnivore existed without even a hint of it in science. He jumped again. This time he heard a scraping sound. He looked at the paw. Yes, he could do that. Then there was silence. He stood, throat dry. A light flashed in the scientist's eyes. "Hello, Doctor," said a gruff voice. "What the hell? Wait a minute, we're cops. This is an investigation." "Oh, you scared me. I thought it was them." Wilson flipped on the lights. "I don't blame you, Doctor. This place is spooky." Becky pulled the window closed. "We were looking for you." "You have no right to come in here this way." Wilson sighed raggedly. Ferguson saw how tired the man was, tired and afraid. "Oh, you come in then." "Those are easy windows," Wilson murmured. "The museum has guards." "Yeah, we figured that out." Ferguson began to sputter, but Becky said smoothly, "We wouldn't be here if we weren't desperate. We want your theories, Doctor, your speculations." "Anything that might help us stay alive, Doctor," Wilson added. "I can't. I want to help you, but I don't understand how to apply the knowledge I have." Becky paused. "Why not tell us something you do understand, like the sense of smell? How effective is it? How can we cover our trails?" Ferguson sat and calmed himself. "Well, the bloodhound is the most sensitive. There's almost 100 million separate cells in the olfactory mucosa. Let's see if I can quantify it. Take a pinch of pigment, paint, let's say, and spread it over 100 million cubic centimeters, about as much air as covers Manhattan. A good bloodhound could detect this amount of pigment in that amount of air." Becky felt as if she'd been hit. She fought to stay calm. "But what if you neutralize the odor?" "Well, it makes absolutely no difference. People have tried everything to break track. One thing, floating down a river, completely submerged. If you can make it half a mile without putting your head out of the water, you might break track. A single breath coming up through the water could be enough for a dog." "Breath? They track by body oils and exhaled breath." "There's no way of nullifying your odor?" "Sure. Take a bath. You'll feel safe for a while as long as you don't put on your clothes." Wilson raised his eyebrows. "How long?" "Oh, a good 3 or 4 minutes, until your skin oils start replacing themselves." "Oh, wonderful." There was an uneasy edge in Wilson's voice. "What about neutralizing their sense of smell?" "Yeah, good question. You can cause osmonesthesia with something like cocaine, or you could use amphetamine. That stuff you could disguise in meat." "Here, doggy, have a little snacker." "Oh, shut up, George." A sudden silence reminded them they'd been here a long time. The plan was to keep to the car, keep moving. Becky asked about the safety of the car. Tracking dogs can follow bicycles, cars. In fact, it's easier because there's more odor laid down. But there's hundreds of thousands of cars. Difficult, but not out of the question. So, we can't get rid of our odors. We can't neutralize their noses without getting a hell of a lot closer than we want to be. Is there any more bad news? Ferguson shrugged. "Well, I can tell you about canine sense of smell. Smell and sound are their primary senses. Sight is a distant third. For example, if you put on a friend's clothes, your dog won't recognize you until you speak. Then, when he hears your voice, he'll be very relieved. And this means more to a dog the more sensitive their noses are." "How so?" "Well, a good bloodhound might have a nose 100 million times more sensitive than a human nose. A wolf would be 200 million times more sensitive, and wolves are correspondingly more intelligent to handle the data." Wilson picked up the paw model. Is this closer to a wolf or a dog? A wolf, I'd say. Except those toes are really wonderful. They are beyond canine. That's why I keep asking you for a head. Right now, whatever made those prints is outside of science. Well, we can't give you more, Dr. Becky said. You know the trouble we're in. We'd be lucky even to get a picture. These things are too vicious for that, Wilson signaled Becky with his eyes. We ought to go, Becky said. Our best bet is to keep on the move. Yeah, you're probably right. I'll go out with you. Their feet crunched in the snow as they crossed to their car. Nothing seemed to be moving. Even so, the trip to the car seemed long. Becky knew Wilson felt the same way as he kept his hand on his revolver. Ferguson took his leave, and Becky and Wilson discussed his fate. Was even he safe now? They headed toward a Chinese restaurant. After dinner, what could they do? What about the days and nights to come? What about the future? She sat back to enjoy what could easily be her last meal. She stopped the thought. You think that way? It happens. They discussed the information Ferguson had given them. It's a matter of time before our friends get us, Wilson grumbled. Then the department will move in. It won't make a damn bit of difference to us. Oh, we need evidence. Photographs. How do you photograph what you never see? Although we could use the infrared equipment. Now, I've got a better idea. Narcotics has some computerized image intensification equipment. Stuff developed during the Vietnam War. Dick's unit's been using it. It's like an oversized pair of binoculars. The camera's built in. What you see, you photograph. It's got a 500mm lens, so you don't have to get too close. That's the damnedest thing I ever heard of. We could be staked out on the roof of my building, watching for them to come back. Yeah. We could get our pictures and pull out before they started climbing the terraces. There's only one hitch. Dick's got to be convinced to help us. He's got to give us the equipment, and it's classified. Wilson frowned. Look, Dick owes you a favor, George. Why? Oh, you know why. Wilson had taken her on as a partner because Dick Neff had asked him to. He may think it was a favor, but it wasn't. Jesus, you're going to seed, Wilson. You actually complimented my police work just then. He laughed heartily, and then his face returned to its usual glower. You're right. Maybe Dick will let me collect the favor. Becky left to call ahead to the apartment. Dick was there, his voice sounding thick. When she told him she was bringing Wilson over, his only comment was a non-committal grunt. As soon as she opened the door to the apartment, Becky felt something was wrong. She left Wilson in the hall while she went to see Dick in the living room. Look, why did you pick tonight to bring that old fart up here, were his first words. Look, I had to, honey. It can't wait. I got burned. There it was. As simple as that. He had been recognized as a police officer by his suspects. Bad? Real bad. Some son of a bitch really put it on me. Oh, Dick, that's terrible. How? No, never mind, honey. Just say it was 2 years of work blown to hell, and I think they've got a shoe fly on my ass, too. You're clean, aren't you? But her heart sank. It meant that Internal Affairs had put a man on to investigate him. You know damn well I'm not clean. He said it with infinite tiredness. And he looked older, hollow. Oh, look, let's get drunk or something later, celebrate my early retirement, but bring Wilson in now, let him do his thing. She called Wilson in, and he shook hands with Dick. They settled into the living room, and Wilson made his request. The night vision camera? What for? We need it for the creatures, honey. Oh, Christ almighty, that bullshit again. What are you, two nuts or something? I can't get that goddamn camera, not while I've got shoe flies hanging from my goddamn ears. We need your help, Neff. I helped you. Oh, Christ, the favor, the great big favor. I don't give a rat's ass about your favor, Wilson. The camera could solve this case for us, honey. We only need it for a night or so. But you need me to work the damn thing. You gotta know how to use it. It took me weeks to learn. Oh, Dick, please, just one night. After a moment, he nodded. Just like that, he agreed. She wished she felt more than grateful, but she didn't. His anger made her wish she wouldn't have to spend the rest of the night with him. She showed Wilson to the door. She wondered if she'd ever see him alive again. Then she stopped herself. Not aloud. Then she turned to face the rest of the night with her husband. They were hungry. They wanted food. Their need to follow their enemies brought them into the center of the city. They moved in single file behind the wall that rings Central Park. They knew the benches on the other side were occupied and scented one, a man, sleeping, who exuded the smell of alcohol. This meant food easily gotten. They moved closer. 3 jumped on the wall. The one closest examined her victim intently. She would have to jump, plunge her muzzle into the cloth and rip out the throat all at once. If it struggled, she would disappoint the pack. She listened up and down the street. Only automobile traffic, nobody on foot. Now she was down, feeling the response of the man, his muscles stiffening, then opening her mouth, tasting the deliciously salty skin, and ripping with all her strength, jumping back to the wall with the bloody throat in her mouth. The body barely rustled as its blood poured out. Her job was over. She dropped out of sight and ate her trophy. The pack was happy as it worked. 3 of them lifted the body over the wall and let it drop with a thud. 2 others stripped the clothing away to shred it and hide it before they returned to eat. The corpse was pulled open, the organs sniffed carefully. 1 lung and the stomach were put aside because of rot. Then the pack ate in rank order. The mother took the brain, the father took a thigh and a buttock. The first mated pair ate the clean organs. When they returned from their duty, the second mated pair took the rest. Then, piece by piece, they pulled apart the remains and dropped them into the nearby lake where the bones would sink. Now they kicked the new snow over the blood of their feast. They went to a meadow, and they ran and they danced in the new snow, feeling the joy of their bodies. Then they went to a tunnel where they had slept for 4 nights and settled down. Before sleeping, the second mated pair made love, both to entertain the others and to prepare for spring. Then the pack slept. After a few short hours, they woke, left their hiding place, and moved back out into the silent streets. Wilson did not sleep. He went to his bedroom and unlocked a chest containing highly illegal weapons, a sawed-off shotgun, a World War II vintage BAR, and an Ingram M11 automatic pistol. He pulled the pistol out and got a box of shells. It was the finest automatic handgun ever made, designed purely and simply to kill. He laid the pistol on the bed. Then he put on an overcoat he rarely wore. It had been designed to carry the M11 invisibly in a pocket, and he slipped the gun carefully inside. Next, he put on an old hat and sneakers lined with foam. As a final precaution, he took out the pistol and removed fingerprints. Owning and carrying around a pistol such as this was illegal for policeman and civilian alike. He was ready to move. His only advantage was the fact that the hunters were not used to being hunted. While he saw the danger of what he was doing, he nevertheless felt that he had to give Becky some kind of chance for survival. She deserved to live. As for him, he could take a few chances, and it was a hell of a long chance he was taking. The thought of being killed by things made clammy sweat break out. But he knew that he and Becky had to have help if they were going to live much longer, and to get it, they needed a specimen. Irrefutable, undeniable evidence that would force Underwood to assign the kind of manpower they needed. And if Wilson got killed getting it, oh God, he wanted to live. With luck, he would take a few with him. Had to. He left his apartment, making sure his doors were all locked. The snow was heavier. He hoped it would muffle his sounds. He set out to find his quarry. He reasoned that the creatures would be more likely to hit Becky first because she was younger and therefore more dangerous to them. Wilson, slow, old, sick, would be second in line, and they had gone to such lengths to get to Becky, and had left him pretty much alone. Of course, they had come in the basement. Wilson had dusted it and found 2 sets of paw prints, and there were scratch marks on the lock. He took a bus uptown to Central Park West. He got off and spotted Becky's building, saw that she had left the terrace lights on. A good precaution. He moved toward the alley where the creatures must have congregated. They would be coming back here sooner or later. He settled down behind a garbage can to wait. 1 o'clock. The wind moaned. 2 o'clock. The snow fell heavily. 3 o'clock. Then it was quiet. Involuntarily he gasped. He had fallen asleep. 4:20. Damn! Over an hour out. And across the street, standing in the light, were 6 of the ugliest, most horrifying things he had ever seen. These things were big as timber wolves. Their heads perched on necks much longer than that of a wolf. He could practically feel them listening to him. He couldn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off those faces. The faces were not even a little human, but they were clearly intelligent. Fire the pistol! Slowly the pistol came out of his pocket, and, without a sound, they were gone. Not a trace, not even the rustle of a foot in the snow. He hadn't counted on speed like that then. He was running too, as fast as he could, running frantically toward a lighted window, an all-night deli, then through the door. Jesus, don't scare me like that, man. I'm sorry. I'm cold. You got coffee? Yeah, coming up. You in trouble, man? No, I'm just trying to keep warm, is all. The man handed him his coffee, and Wilson moved it to his face. Oh, great God. I'm alive. I got that goddamn gun out fast. 1 second later, and they would have had me. He sipped again, calming himself slowly, consciously. His thoughts returned. It occurred to him that if they were that fast, they could have gotten past his defenses before he had even realized they were there. Why was he allowed to live? The pistol hadn't been any protection at all. He almost knew why they had to run, but didn't. He asked the counterman if there were somewhere he could sleep. He flashed his badge at the man's questions, and the man showed him to a storeroom where Wilson hunkered down onto a cot. When he closed his eyes, he saw them again. For some reason, they wanted him alive a little longer. Then he remembered the moose and the wolves. Did the moose feel love for the wolves? Or a fear so great that it mimicked love? When they realized who was concealed in the alley, they were full of glee. He had come to protect the female, just as the father said he would. The father knew man very well, and he had detected that the man loved his female co-worker. Father had said we could move against them together because the male will try to protect the female. And they went, and there he was, asleep. The second mated pair moved into position across the street. They were just about to move when the man raised his head and looked at them. The pack froze and smelled it. The gun. It was a hard decision, instantly made by Mother. We leave. We don't risk moving so far against the gun. We'll get him another time. Now the pack ran, rushing to the ruined building where they would spend the day. Each felt the agonizing knowledge. They live, and they know about us. They must be telling others, spreading the fear that the old legends speak about, the fear that would make life among men hard and dangerous for future generations. Endless number of men would overwhelm them. or at least force them into furtive, tormented lives unworthy of free beings. One thought consumed them all. Kill the dangerous ones. Kill them fast. They all felt the urge for blood, all except Father, who said, "We have won. Soon he will give himself to us, for the death wish is coming upon him." Wilson woke, looked around dazed, then remembered. He got up and thanked the deli man and left. It was still lonely out on the streets. He walked back by Becky's building, then stopped. They had come here because they knew he would be here. They were hunters, for Christ's sake. They knew where he'd be. It was probably exactly what one of them would have done, protect the one he loved. What the hell? The bitch was beautiful. Fair cop, too, but so beautiful. He thought of her eyes, her lips inviting the first long kiss. But not now. Now it was cold and he was hungry. His watch said 6:30. He couldn't go just anywhere with a loaded M11, so he went to his office. And his eyes widened in surprise. There sat Evans. "Hiya, Doc. Do we owe you money?" Evans didn't banter. "We got another one. Call Neff. Tell her to meet us at the scene." Somewhere out there, a phone was ringing. She stumbled up and answered it. Wilson didn't waste hellos. "Oh, Christ. Okay, see you there." She hung up. "Gotta go. Homicide in the park. Looks like our friends got hungry again." "Big Bad Wolves? Is our picture-taking exhibition still on?" "I hope so. I'll call you." "Okay, honey." The gentleness in his voice stopped her. The intensity of the night before was clear in Dick's face. He was grateful. It touched her. Made her think that maybe there was still something left after all. Goodbye. Don't make it sound so final. Worst I'll get is early retirement. Oh, by the way, there's something else I want to say before you go. He threw off the covers, exposing his body and erect penis with a delightful lack of modesty. "You still remain one of the great American lays, darling." She bent over, kissing his smiling face. "Dick, you never get enough. I wish I didn't have to go." She pulled away, confused. Did she still love Dick Neff, or didn't she? And what about Wilson? What did her feelings for him mean? As she got into her car, her mind closed around the case. As she rolled toward Central Park, she saw the flashing lights that marked the crime scene. She introduced herself, and the lieutenant showed her the bench with its pool of blood. "How do you know it was a murder? Too much blood lost. And we can see where the body was pulled across the wall." She saw the indentations in the snow covered by a new layer. "Is this blood all you have? No body, no clothing, nothing?" Evans approached. He had found hairs, he said, that matched the ones at the earlier crime scenes. They hid the remains. They're very bright. Becky nodded, then looked at Wilson. Hadn't he slept at all? Becky motioned Evans and Wilson over to her car where they wouldn't be overheard. Evans told them what they knew. They had jumped over the wall, dragged the corpse back over, dismembered it, and hid the pieces. Oh, Becky shuddered. "We need to find some kind of identification." Evans said, "I have the hairs. I don't need anything more to convince me." "So they kill a lot. It's to be expected from a carnivorous animal." "Carnivorous humanoid," Becky corrected. Wilson laughed. "From what I've seen, they could hardly be described as humanoid. And what have you seen?" "Them." Becky and Evans stared at him. "Last night I saw 6 of them outside your apartment. I was hunting them, trying to get Ferguson his specimen. They're fast, though. It's lucky I'm still alive." Becky was stunned. She looked at her partner's haggard face. He had been out there guarding her, the crazy, sweet old romantic jerk. At this moment, she felt she was seeing a hidden, secret Wilson, seeing him for the very first time. She could have kissed him. Carl Ferguson was horrified and excited by what he was reading. In the New York Public Library was one of the world's best collections of books, and it was because of the book that he looked at that Ferguson felt such an extremity of fear. What he read was almost too fantastic and horrible to believe, and yet the words were there. The old legends were true. Here were stories going back thousands of years, repeating the mythology of the werewolf, and then, suddenly, in the latter part of the 19th century, silence. The legends died. But why? The answer was simple. Tormented for generations by humanity's vigilance and fear, the werewolves had found a way to hide from man. They lived among us, unknown to all except those who didn't live to tell the tale. They took only the abandoned, and now the huge masses which society ignored were fodder for these werewolves. And no doubt the population of werewolves had exploded right along with the human population. But there was something even more disquieting, and that was the references to men and werewolves in communication with one another. Stories of men chanting to a circle of wolves in the moonlight, then vanishing with them. Why did men once run with the werewolves? It said that vampires were often connected to werewolves. Vampires, eaters of blood. In other words, cannibals. The idea seemed fantastic, but Ferguson knew the probable truth. Cannibalism must have been common in the Europe of the Dark Ages, when grinding poverty was the fate of most humans. It must have tempted the hungry to go find the werewolves and hunt with them, living like a scavenger off the pickings. The role of the human scavenger was to coax people out of their houses into the shadows where they could be ripped apart. It was ugly, but it meant that there had been communication between man and werewolf in the past, and could be again. And how rich might communication be between modern science and this extraordinary species? Ferguson tried to accept the fearful truth that he had uncovered. That damn Wilson had first said it, werewolf, and they claimed they were being hunted by them with good reason. Once their secret was out, the life of the werewolf would be made immeasurably harder, like in the old days when humanity bolted its doors against them. Man would declare all-out war on his adversary, and at last he would have a fair fight on his hands. Ferguson couldn't imagine what the mind behind the ears and nose of the werewolf must be like. The sheer quantity of information must literally be millions of times greater than that reaching man's brain. That mind must be a miracle indeed. And if there were intelligence there, it could be reasoned with, and the enemies could learn to live together in peace. If Carl Ferguson had any part in this at all, it was as the missionary of reason and understanding. Ferguson went in search of a particular book, an antique that could only be handled by the librarian. The librarian opened the stiff pages, and Ferguson felt sweat trickling down his temples. There was an engraving of a man surrounded by wolf-like creatures, communication between them. And the author, de Chavoncourt himself, must have known them, and, in the end, they destroyed him. He had the librarian stop at descriptions of language used among the wolves, myriad gestures and sounds used to express themselves. Ferguson sketched the hand signs used to communicate with the wolves: run, kill, attack, flee. And then the mention of vampires. This was the language used with the wolves to communicate during the hunts. The librarian turned the page. Ferguson jumped up, knocking over his chair. "Sir! I'm sorry." He righted the chair. The engraving he saw was so horrible. A werewolf, close up, face to face. The eyes stared out at him like something out of a nightmare. "That will be enough," the librarian said. "I think you're upset. Those engravings, horrible, yes, but they don't call for hysterics." Ferguson wondered what she would think if she knew the truth. He left her, and he walked back to his office. Then he stopped. The cops had a point. What if the damn things were hunting him too? He jammed his hands into his pockets, and he walked more quickly on. Dick Neff padded naked into the kitchen to fix himself another drink. His mind was working in a haze of anguish. Becky, shoe flies, burns, sorrows. God damn, he couldn't believe what had almost happened, how close he had come to death. He had been moving with Andy Jakes for 6 months, really working in with him. God damn, biggest fucking dealer in the Northeast. If he had collared Andy Jakes, the shoe flies would have laid off out of respect. But now he was just another victim of that brilliant crook's mind. He'd been about to enter Jake's apartment when his teammates had gotten to him. "Hold it, Dick, we got trouble. The bug's picking up a lot of movement in there. Don't go in. There's people in there, lots of people moving around, not talking." "Shit, that must mean they suspect a bug. They're waiting for me. Shit. And then he followed his instincts. He stopped. And then they were off trying to get a warrant to bust the place when the call came that they were leaving. Surveillance followed them to the airport, heading for Brazil. Shit. And then they got the warrant and entered the apartment, so it's empty, of course, except for the goddamn note. "Sorry, Richard. I know how much of an embarrassment this will be to you. Cordially, Andy." Oh, the guys got a whoop out of that note. The other guys were almost happy that Dick hadn't made his collar. "Dick, you know what was waiting for you in there?" Captain Fogarty had said. "A goddamn arsenal. 6 or 7 people waiting in there, creeping around, blown you away. I'd have never laid eyes on you again, old buddy." Well, maybe that would have been better. Because Internal Affairs was closing in on Dick Neff. Somehow or other, IAD had gotten wind of Dick's little deal with Mort Harper. It was a nice, clean gambling establishment. The best clientele, even the fucking DA was there once. But Mort had put the finger on Neff, had built up his connections to where he didn't need Neff's silence anymore. Oh, Morty was beautiful, too. Smarter than Dick Neff. Everybody was smarter than Dick Neff. Even the shoe-fly captain with his funny questions. Bank accounts? Tax returns? He swallowed the last of the Bloody Mary and went to look at the bright snow that covered the balcony. And then, what he saw made him gape. Paw prints. Clear as you please, he stared at them, disbelieving. Paw prints? He squatted down and examined them. Shit, Becky wasn't imagining things after all. These damn prints were real, and they didn't belong here. He suddenly felt exposed and returned to the bedroom to dress. He fought for clarity. Those 2 crazies were right. Old shit-kicker Wilson wasn't senile after all. Then, suddenly, if she was in danger and he didn't help her, he'd kill himself. He'd take his goddamn .38 and he'd put the barrel in his mouth and he'd pull the goddamn trigger. Let the department face that one. He put on a conservative suit and brushed down his hair. He had to get that Starlight camera. He hoped the news about IAD hadn't traveled to the photo unit yet. He glanced at the paw prints again. Oh, they were ugly. Frightening. He pulled the curtains closed and went downstairs. He stopped by Frenchie's bar, ordered another Bloody Mary. He sat down to think. The old man. A pang of sentiment went through him. The senile old man had once been so powerful, so determined. Retirement pay plus Social Security, $177.90, a lousy month. Parkinson's disease had turned to violence, periodic seizures, $1,000 a month problem. You don't give your old man over to the tender care of the state. Not when you've seen the inside of those places firsthand, a bunch of monsters making life hell for the old and the helpless. Those places were playgrounds for sadistic perverts masquerading as attendants. No place for his old man. Dick ordered a hamburger and the food steadied his nerves. He lurched out of the bar, heading downtown to headquarters. The photo unit was in its usual mess. Jablonski resisted a little when he made his request for the Starlight gear, but after a few glares he settled down, pulled the equipment out, and ran through the instructions with Dick. He warned Dick about damaging the camera. It was worth about $100,000 and could not be replaced. Dick shrugged. He'd heard the spiel before. As soon as he was gone, Jablonski was on the phone. "Captain," he said, "you wanted me to call if Dick Neff came around here." Well, he did. He checked out the Starlight camera. Search teams kept coming back empty-handed. A bench covered with a slick of red ice, some tattered remnants of cloth, that was all. No body, no ID, no witnesses. This was just another one of those mysteries that the city tossed up. Obviously, somebody died here, but nothing much could be done to find the killer. Becky Neff was silent. At least, Evans believed them. But since relating his story, Wilson had grown, if possible, more morose. Suddenly, there was a flare of activity. Becky flipped on the radio. 13, repeat, 13 to Bethesda Fountain. Jesus! Becky started the car, followed the others into the park, as Signal 13 was the most serious call a policeman could put out. It meant that an officer was in distress. It was the call that cops hated most to hear and wanted most to answer. Becky pulled up behind the scooters, and the three of them jumped out. They reached the wounded man. "Fucking dog," he said. "A fucking dog bit a hole in my side. Oh, fuck, it hurts," the man shouted, and then he passed out. The medics pulled up, and they cut the coat away and exposed the wound. It was devastating. You could see the black-blue bulge of the man's intestine. Becky stifled a sob. They had done this just now. Just minutes ago. They were right around here. The cops were silent. What could you say? A man had just had his intestines laid open, and he claimed it had been done by a dog. Becky felt Wilson's hand grasp her shoulder. "Listen, kid," he said in an unnaturally calm tone. "Stroll real easy over to those two scooters." He breathed it into her ear. "Just go real easy." "What about the car?" "Stay the hell away from our car. And when you get on that scooter, move." She didn't ask questions. You trusted your partner. They meandered toward the scooters, then Wilson shouted, "Now, Becky!" They leaped. The scooters coughed to life. They swayed, then headed straight down the mall. She heard a shout behind, from a scooter cop who saw the detectives suddenly hijack his transportation. Then something else was there, a gray shape, moving like the wind, a furious, pulsing mass of hair and muscle. She knew what had happened. "Oh, God, God, God," she said softly as she rode. She jammed the accelerator, and the scooter darted through the snow. 30, 40, 50. Was it dropping back? She glanced. God! It was right there. Its teeth were bared, and his face, oh, something unbelievable, twisted with hate and fury and effort. Animal, man, something. She choked out a sob and just held on. The thing's breathing was clearly audible for a moment, then it fell back, making sharp little sounds of pure anger. It was gone, and the scooters bounded through the shrubs and tore down the park entrance at Fifth Avenue. They stopped in front of the Plaza Hotel, and Wilson radioed for a pickup. A squad car appeared, and they climbed in. Wilson and Neff were silent as they rode toward the precinct. Wilson, because he had nothing to say, and Becky, because she couldn't have talked if she'd wanted to. It felt funny to be alive right now, like she had just broken through a wall into a time she was never intended to see. I was supposed to die back there, she thought. She looked at her partner. He had figured it out just in time. A trap. God, what a clever trap. And they had slipped out just as it had been sprung. "You know what happened?" Wilson asked. "Yep. They're very smart. But that was a neat trap. Wounding that guy, knowing we would respond, setting an ambush, all very smart. How did you figure it out?" "You ought to start thinking defensively. They wounded that guy. Didn't kill him. That's what tipped me off. Why wound when killing is easier? It had to be a lure. When I figured that out, well, I decided we ought to go for the scooters. Frankly, I'm surprised we made it." They arrived at the precinct house, looked carefully around, then got out. "What the hell's going on?" the captain demanded. "Everybody saw those dogs come out from under your car and chase you halfway to Grand Army Plaza. I'd like to know what the hell is going on." The phone rang. A few muttered words, then a curse. "And so would the New York Post. They got a reporter waiting to see me right now. Now, what do I tell them?" Becky stepped in. "Tell them what's true, that he was a little delirious and was wounded in an unknown manner. The dogs chasing us, that was a complete coincidence." The man stared at them. "I'm not going to push it. Just take off." They left the precinct and hailed a cab. As they approached their car, Wilson craned his neck to make sure nothing was underneath it. But that car wasn't going anywhere. The doors were open, the interior of the car was ripped to shreds, and it was full of bloody pulp. "Jesus," the cab driver blurted, "we got to get a cop." Wilson pressed his badge against the glass shield, and the driver took them to the Central Park precinct house. "Get your guys back over to the fountain," Wilson rasped. "The chief medical examiner's just got himself killed." Becky grew pale. Of course. That must be who was in the car. Poor Evans. He was a hell of a good man. God damn it, Becky said. "We were stupid. We should have warned him in advance," he laughed bitterly. "They missed the main event, so they went for the consolation prize." He got Underwood on the phone. "Look," he said, "you got problems. You got a cop with his guts laid open, says dogs did it. Got that, dogs. A reporter from the Post is on it, and more to follow. So listen, dummy. You got one chief medical examiner just murdered, so you're going to find it was done by claws and teeth. And if you want this one wrapped up real good, just sit on your can and wait." He slammed down the phone. "Oh, God, what about Ferguson?" "You're right. Let's go." They got another car from the motor pool and headed over to the museum. Becky was shocked by the loss of Evans, probably the best practitioner of forensic medicine in the world, and a good friend. And the manner of his death was going to stop the presses even over at the Times. They rushed down to Ferguson's office and went right in. They told him of Evans' death, and Ferguson reacted as if he'd been hit. "Look, I found out a lot about werewolves this morning," he said almost inaudibly. "Canis lupus sapiens, the Wolfen. Now, that's what I want to call them." The cops were silent. Wolfen, indeed. They were killers. It was obvious Ferguson still didn't understand the extremity of his danger. She felt sorry for him in a detached way. "Join the hunted," Wilson said. "Maybe we'll form a co-op." The humor was strained, but it got a positive reaction from Ferguson. He gushed out his findings and of his hopes for communication with them. Wilson laughed. It chilled Becky. It was not a normal laugh, but that of someone deeply frightened. She wondered how much longer she would have his help. He had saved them in the park by bare seconds. How many more times could he do it? Would the traps just keep getting more and more subtle until finally the hunted were down? "Let's plan our next move," she said. "We've got to be very damn careful if what just happened is any example of what's on the way." "Plan what?" "We haven't got anything to plan." "Oh, come on, Wilson, take it easy. We may just as well try. Let's plan to take pictures tonight." "How about planning to survive until tonight? Wouldn't that be better, since it looks kinda hard to do?" She shook her head. He was a petulant bastard. Up to now she'd relied on him, but now he was cracking, getting close to the edge. But Becky didn't intend to die. She wasn't going to give in. Wilson was getting tired. It looked like her turn to take charge now. Ferguson warned them. "Don't breathe a word of this to the papers. If these creatures take it into their heads to completely disappear, they can do it. Right now, they're being very careless. You've seen them. That's carelessness on their part. But they know you will probably not live to describe them to others. They're predators, and they have the arrogance of predators." "I hope they are arrogant, frankly," Becky broke in. "It's our only chance. Yeah, unless they're playing a game. You're a challenge. They might be spreading it out for fun." Wilson looked like he wanted to throttle the scientist. "Let 'em play. Maybe we'll get the fuck out of the trap in the meantime," he spat. "Who the hell knows?" They ran, desperate for cover. Humanity was pouring into the park, police by the hundreds swarming everywhere, and there was a new smell. Thick and putrid, a parody of their own scent. It was dogs. The pack stopped, 3 dogs by the sound of them, eager to be unleashed. And they had the scent, choking themselves with eagerness to give chase. Oh, very well, let them come and die. Dogs could no more hunt the pack than chimpanzees could hunt men. The only trouble was that it meant more time wasted in this accursed park, more time for their luck to run out. The pack was divided now. On one side were the two old ones and the second mated pair. On the other was the third mated pair. This pair had run after the two humans who had escaped just an instant too soon and had given up the chase a few minutes early. Another breath, another footstep, and the quarry would have been down. The beautifully laid plan was wasted, or almost wasted. The old man in the car had been all they could kill. Oh, well, very well. Certainly they had heard him in the car, muttering words with the others like, "Wolf, wolf." Human language, so complex, was hard to follow. But they all knew certain words that had been handed down by the generations. Among these was wolf. But wolves were sweet, with the blank expressions of animals. So the little old man was contaminated by the other two, the two who knew. He died instantly. They had crept up to the car, and one of them had opened the door. The man's hands fluttered as his bowels let loose. That was all that happened. Then they were on him, pulling and tearing, ripping, full of rage, angry that the two important ones had been missed. They had cracked open the head and torn the brain utterly to destroy the filthy knowledge. And in their anger they had also shredded the interior of the car for sheer hate. They would have done more to it if they'd known how. Somehow the humans made these things move, and they made other similar things fly in the air. Man was of two faces, naked and weak, clothed and powerful. The same man who had no defense on his own might be completely invulnerable in a car with a gun. The pack had speed, hearing, and smell to protect itself. Men had metal and weapons. They envied man with his hands that fashioned these mysterious objects that rolled and flew, and the guns that shot, and it was because of them that man had been able to inhabit the cities. No pack knew how these cities grew and why man possessed them. Oh, just as well. They kept the herds of men closely gathered so that hunting was easy. But not many of them were fun to hunt. For the most part, it was the same routine as it would be with these stupid, eager dogs. The dogs were released. Their voices pealed, communicating the heedless excitement that was characteristic of the creature. They chose their stand carefully. They split up on two sides of an overgrown path, and the second female went down in clear view. Oh, they were stupid animals. And you had to make it very clear what they were supposed to do if you expected them to do it. They swarmed up the path, howling, saw the female, who growled and leaped to make sure, and then ran into the underbrush. The dogs raced in after her when the rest of the pack dropped out of the trees onto them. Their bodies writhed, the carcasses were hurled into the brush, and the pack moved quickly on. They went away from the smell of man, turning their minds to food. But they must make their next kill as far away as possible. Then the pack stopped. They inhaled deeply. In the air was the faintest whiff of the two. Had they passed by recently, or were they inside that building? It was hard to tell. The odor was too faint. They crossed the street and went into the grounds around the building. Yes, the scent was now a little stronger. But better to be very slow and careful. The creatures were not dumb and knew they were being hunted. They hid themselves wherever they could. The scent hung here. The sweet smell of the woman and the denser smell of the man. And there was another familiar odor, more salty, one they had smelled near the two before. They settled down to wait. Waiting was easy. It added the excitement of anticipation. Sam Garner pulled up in front of the Museum of Natural History. Two detectives were in there whom he wanted to see. He had it planned. He would ask about Evan's death, and that it happened in their car. He wanted to see their reactions. Somewhere there was some kind of story, maybe big, and these two just might have some idea what it was. Carl Ferguson's phone rang. It was Underwood, for Wilson. "Look, I've got to tell you, there's a hell of a lot of press pounding the pavements on this one. So far, nobody's made the connection between his death and the other murders. So don't, if you know what I mean." "Oh, no, I won't. You should have given in when you first knew I was right, the first time you heard my story." There was a silence on the other end. Finally, Underwood spoke. "Detective Wilson," he said, "have you considered, if your story is true, what kind of a reaction it will cause?" "Yeah, panic, mayhem, blood in the streets, plus heads will roll. The heads of the people who didn't do anything about it when they could. My head, you'd sacrifice this city for that? Thousands of people would pour the hell out of the city. This is a great city, Wilson, but I think that would break it. Yeah, and you along with it. People will come back when they realize that the werewolves aren't just a local attraction. But you won't come back, Herbie. You'll be completely retired." Underwood's voice was bitter. "I hope to hell you're wrong. Nothing would give me more pleasure than kicking your ass off the force." The phone clicked off. "Good God," Becky said, "what the hell possessed you to talk to him like that? He's a fucking jerk, a two-bit jerk. That doesn't give you the right... I knew you two grew up together and all that, but my God, you'll destroy us both." "What are you two talking about?" They turned at a strange voice. A small man stood there, smiling more than he should. "Name's gone on New York Post. You folks, Detectives Neff and Wilson?" "Yeah, come back later. We don't want any." "Just one question. How come Dr. Evans was murdered in your car? Any comment?" Well, of course, he didn't expect a straight answer. It was how they looked that counted. "You get the hell out of here. Move." He scurried away, smiling from ear to ear. He loved it. Oh, there was going to be a damn good story. "Sometimes I think we should tell them something," Ferguson said when the reporter was gone. "You tell them." "Oh, no, I couldn't. I haven't got enough evidence. Well, neither have we. That's why we've got to get that clincher. Once we have it, we can blow the story from here to Moscow for all I care. But I'm not going to break it early. Can you imagine? Detective alleges werewolves killed M.E. Underwood would love that." Wilson, suddenly, was very tired. They had a long night ahead of them, and already the day was growing dark. Time was bringing them closer to the truth, that they were going to die. He always had a knack for prophecy. Now he had a premonition. He was standing in the middle of Becky's bedroom when one of them jumped out of the curtains and buried its head in his stomach. As the sheer pain hit, he saw its tail wagging. Then something hit him. "Good Christ, Wilson, what the hell's got into you?" Becky was shaking him. "Calm down, it's just a stress reaction," Ferguson said. "Call him back." "Wilson, you motherfucker, wake up!" In response, he pulled her down to the chair and clumsily embraced her, held her against him. After a moment she pulled back, and he relaxed. "Oh, God, I feel awful." "Take it easy," Ferguson said. "It was a stress reaction. People in crashing planes, burning buildings experience it. If the situation isn't terminal, the condition passes." He smiled lamely. "God damn it, I wish to hell we were out of this," Wilson shouted. "Please," Ferguson said, "you could cause me problems." "Oh, I'm sorry, Doctor. Excuse me." Becky said quietly, "Don't think about death." "You thought about death? Think about our camera. Tonight we'll get our pictures, and then things will start to move. All the evidence, plus the pictures, nobody will be able to deny it. And then we'll get some protection." "Damn right. Whatever happens, it'll be better than this, God knows." For the first time, Becky allowed herself to imagine it. About the only thing that would help would be virtual imprisonment. At first it would mean a good night's sleep, but then it would get unendurable, and she would give up. It was hard to turn from this train of thought, and now death flashed into her own imagination. But she couldn't think about that either. Think of the next moment, not the future. Think about the camera. Yet Dick probably has the camera by now. It's nearly 3. Let's go plan the stakeout. It's going to be a long night. Ferguson smiled. Frankly, I think it'll be exciting. Obviously there's danger, but my God, look at the magnitude of the discovery. Both the detectives stared at him in amazement. Ferguson's words made them realize that there was beauty there too. The presence of the werewolf, once proven, could completely change the life of man. Of course there would be panic and terror, but there would also be the new challenge. Man had always confronted nature by beating it down. This was going to require something new. The werewolf would have to be accepted. He wasn't likely to submit to a beating. Becky felt her inner resolve strengthening. Vengeance, that's what she felt. It damn well was an extraordinary moment. Mankind was in this situation and had a right to know. Becky called Dick. He was subdued. He'd obviously heard of Evan's death. She felt something new when she heard Dick's voice. There was a sensation of closeness that she never remembered. If he had been here, she would have embraced him just to feel the solid presence of his body. Too bad for Dick. He was a better human being than he was a cop. There was a hell of a lot of justice to shaking down organized crime to help this old man in an honest nursing home. It was going to be damned hard when he got his board. Becky saw that Wilson was vacillating between involvement and numbness, and she prodded him into action, running through the details of their plan. Ferguson asked how Evans died, and Wilson related the sequence of events in a monotone. Ferguson spoke after a silence. That's a very clever plan. They must have been amazed that you got away. Yeah, unless they're playing games. Oh, not likely. You're too dangerous. Hunting you must have seemed easy at first. But you're damned hard to get. It's our wits against theirs. What Ferguson said was having a good effect on Wilson, and on her too for that matter. It didn't change the fear, but it added some perspective. But then another thought came to her, an ugly one. How long will they keep up the hunt? A long time, Ferguson said, until they succeed, or get talked out of it. Becky pushed that thought away. Okay, kids, let's hit the road. We've got work to do. Herbert Underwood was troubled. He was waiting to meet with the commissioner. He rolled the case over in his mind, trying to figure how he could weaken the commissioner's position. He wanted the commissioner's job bad. "Come in, Herb," the commissioner called. "I've got 2 mayors screaming at me. I've got reporters hiding everywhere. Tell me what's happened to Evans." "Oh, come on, Bob. Now, you know what I'm up against." "Well, the mayor has the Wilson theory on their brains." "Oh, that theory is total bullshit. I've known Wilson since we were kids, and I think he's trying to pull a fast one on us. I just organized a special squad. They'll be investigating the 3 incidents in Central Park today, working on the assumption that these incidents are entirely separate from the Bronx and Brooklyn cases. It's too far-fetched to think that they're related." The commissioner nodded, satisfied. They bantered a bit. Then Underwood left. The commissioner watched him go. He ain't gonna fuck me, he thought. Soon the chief would be blown high and wide. The commissioner leafed through a report titled Project Werewolf, Eyes Only. This was the only copy. He had written it 3 hours ago, and only the current mayor and the mayor-elect had seen it. At that meeting they had agreed that it was to be kept top secret, that Wilson had been damn close right from the start. Now he pulled a cassette recorder from his desk drawer and played the tape again. Voices. Confusion. Then, "Mama, hey, look out." A sob. There it is. Dog. Something weird. Hey, it cut my uniform. A cry. Voice, Jack. Doc's gotta give you more painkiller. Okay, there was a dog. Big motherfucker, weird, like a human face. Couple of others nearby. Face not like a person. You'll never get it. More whispers. Second voice. The patient is expiring. Tape ends. It wasn't much, but the patrolmen gave them more than they had before. M.O. was established. He turned back to his report. The werewolf killers are a group of twisted individuals utilizing an extremely skillful disguise. That was where Underwood was falling down. He didn't realize that there was a whole group, or that they were disguised. Outside, the museum tension was building. Man's afternoon ritual of moving back to his nest was underway. Soon the hated ones inside would want their food and their nests and start their movement. Then the moment would come, not so long from now. Waiting like this made your heart soar, knowing that relief and success lay as a reward for patience. Very soon now. Garner had gotten a photographer and headed back to the Museum of Natural History. Oh, what a beautiful story it was going to be. They settled down to wait. He hoped, by dogging these two detectives, that they'd do a little singing. It must be something really horrible. Whatever was going on, somebody had torn the medical examiner apart. Not just kill him, but actually tear him apart. Yet the face had even been pulled down off the skull. The throat was gone. The body was severed so completely that the legs fell to the floor when the orderlies tried to move the body. It had been an unusually monstrous murder. All of a sudden, he felt kind of chilled, sick inside. Oh, hurry up, he muttered. A drink lay at the end of this assignment, and he needed it very badly. That's them. Get moving. They walked to the steps of the museum, hiding behind the statue of Teddy Roosevelt. There were Neff and Wilson, another man too, walking hunched over. He recognized their walk. In Nam, people under fire had moved like that. As they approached, the men stepped out and started snapping. Immediately, the two cops pulled their pistols. Something else moved, and the old guy's pistol roared. Don't shoot! But he roared again, and the woman's pistol joined in again and again. But up in the snow, something black was skittering along. Two things. That's what they were firing at. They all sprinted toward Garner's car. Come on, the woman shouted. Move or you're dead. They raced to the car, leaped in, the old guy snarling, Step on it, goddammit! But Garner wasn't stepping on anything. He turned to face the old detective. What the fuck? The detective leveled his pistol at him. Move this vehicle, he said, or I'll blow your brains out. Garner pulled out into traffic very smartly. He didn't have any more questions just now. We got one, Becky said. Not dead, Wilson replied. What the hell happened? Garner managed to bleat. Nothing, Wilson replied. Come on, Wilson, tell him, Ferguson said. Shut up, Doctor, Betty said. We don't need press. Wilson turned around, his face mottled. If this gets out, we may as well kiss our asses goodbye right now. We haven't got evidence, baby, and without it, we'll come across as kooks. We'd be retired, disabled, and those fuckers be on us so goddamn quick. Becky cut in, giving Garner directions. Garner said, What the hell was that? I've got a right to know. No, you don't. You're a reporter. Garner was silent. He noticed that Becky leaned away from the window. Ferguson pressed close against her, and Wilson also sat away from the window, in the front seat. It seemed that they were afraid something was going to come at them through the windows, except the windows were closed. This daylight was a curse. Old Father waited behind the fence at the museum. It was going to be dangerous, difficult, sad work. At times like this, when he was forced to kill the young and strong, he wondered very much about his place in the world. Long years had taught him that man was also a thinking being, that he too enjoyed the beauties of the world. But this did not change the need to kill and eat prey. His pack was wealthy, for many humans lived in its territories. In his own youth, their leader had preferred the isolation of rural life to the harder job of maintaining a city territory, but they had starved in winter and skulked through summer, always wary. When he was grown, he had taken his sister and set out south toward the storied place where uncountable human hordes dwelled. Often they had been challenged by other packs, and each time They had bested the challengers. They marked their boundaries and bore their first litter, a girl and a boy. 2 years later, they had increased their space again and birthed another litter, another male and female. This spring, the first pair would mate, as would he and his sister once again, and next year the second pair would mate, and still more would come. Not too many years from now, he would lead a goodly pack in a large and wealthy territory. From his wretched beginnings, he had come to this, and was glad. The only thing wrong was the two humans with their forbidden knowledge. If it became general among the humanity here, the packs would be forced to scuttle, like dumb animals. The hunter would be hunted, and it would be on his head, and on the heads of his children. For ages hence all the race would remember their failure. His name would become a curse. Others would say of him, "Better he had stayed in the mountains." He sighed, turning his attention back to the problem at hand. Yes, they were coming to the door. He snapped his jaw, bringing the others to their stations. The second mated pair hid under parked cars, and his own sister, her beautiful face shining with bravery and anticipation, her every move calm and royal, went into position on the opposite wall. There would be no escape this time, at last. The hunt was over. Very well, but it was all an ugly and dirty business. You don't take life from young. When one of their own kind grew old, the young gave him death. But he felt a fierce desire to continue and have all of his life. So it must be for the prey. The few times he had been driven to kill young, he had felt the urgent beating of a life that was hard to still, and had hated himself afterwards when his belly was full and his heart heavy. They appeared at the door. The young woman smelled bright and sharp, not like food. Only the older one's scent reminded of food, but still it surged and pulsed with life. He looked at the third mated pair who were with him. He made sure that they would learn never to kill the young, and never to allow yourself to be seen. They saw the pain in their father's face, and he was glad that they knew it was an occasion of sorrow and defeat. Now their bodies tensed. Their victims came on, oblivious to the trap they were in. They reached the foot of the steps, and the third mated pair leaped over the fence. Suddenly a man jumped in the path of the three and made flashes. The old father cursed himself. He had known this man was there, but had thought nothing of it. Now his victims were turning away, and guns were rising, everybody running from the park, the crack of their weapons through the air, the pack leaping the stone wall. They regrouped not far away, closer than was safe. Somebody in the pack was bleeding. Their youngest male was missing. The father stood nose to nose with his family. They gave him reassurance, all but the youngest female. Her eyes said, "Why did you send us?" In her anger, she said that she would not be his daughter if her brother had to die. Her anger was deep, and now that the feelings had passed, they could never be erased. Even as they trotted to where the young one had hidden himself, the father kept shaking his head with grief. "Now look at you," his sister said with her eyes and ears. "You wag your head like a silly wolf. Are you father or child?" He was humiliated, but fought to keep the hair from rising on his neck. His anus remained closed with a conscious effort. He would not allow his instinct to spread the musk of danger in this place. For all his effort, his sister said, "Lose your musk, show your grief to your children. You have not even the courage for that." His musk burst out, the clinging smell filled the air. He cursed himself even as it spread, revealing the weakness he felt within. "I am your father," he said proudly. But his scent was that of fear. Its betrayal was complete. His first son stepped forward, and the four others went toward the wounded youngest male. As soon as they were out of sight, their father rolled onto his back. He lay there, feeling the warm wave of submission flow over him, giving up his leadership. He rolled alone. Even if his son replaced him, the boy would never see his father roll. Now a soft howl arose. Its sorrow made him tremble. It was the note of death. He battled himself for control. He trotted toward his next and terrible duty. He was still the old father, and must be the one to do this. He lifted his head. Let the humans hear. He sounded his dirge, fully and proudly. Now he hurried on again, coming to his family standing around a huddled grey shape. Their faces were torn with grief. They ignored him. As soon as this final duty was done, his leadership would end. He went to his son, sniffed him. The boy was trembling, his eyes rolling into his head. The old father felt the boy's pain in his very bones. Yet even now he felt proud of this boy who had dragged such painful wounds so far in order to conceal himself. The young male took a breath and stared a long moment at his father. Then he relaxed and closed his eyes. The old father did not hesitate. He killed his son with one fierce bite. Immediately the others surrounded him. At once he saw who would assume leadership: his sister. Now it came down to confrontation. Either he would roll or fight. If they fought, they would all fight. 4 of them against him, and all full of rage. He knew he would nonetheless win such a fight, but at what cost? The pack would become rotten with hate as they followed a father they despised. For the greater good of what he had built, he therefore rolled to his sister. She disdained the overture, striding away. Instead, his youngest daughter, quaking with grief over her loss, took the roll. When she grabbed his throat, he closed his eyes, waiting for death. Sometimes the young were overwhelmed and killed the ones who gave them rolls. Eternity passed before she released him. He stood, head low. Leadership lost, his life would become one of risk and danger. There was still one last task to perform before the reorganized pack continued on. They turned the body of their brother on its back and ate him, crushing even his bones in their jaws, consuming every bit of him except a few tufts of fur. He was eaten out of necessity and respect. They would always remember him now, his brave death and his good life. Afterward, they howled. Then they stood in a circle, touching noses, their joy at being together, breaking through all the grief and upset. His sister watched him as he stood confused. Her heart demanded that she comfort him, but she kept her tail flashing high and did not look at his face. Their children could not accept leadership from a father who had planned so badly that one of his own children had been killed. It was just, and they all had to live with it. But she hated seeing him like this. Gone was his beauty, his boundless pride in this little pack. She could not remember a time when she had not been in love with him. Until this curse had come down upon the pack, there had been nothing but happiness. This desperate hunt had disrupted the life of the pack, forcing them into the center of the city. Now it had destroyed their happiness too. Could she lead them better than her brother? She doubted it. The alternative was to give it to her headstrong first son, who certainly could not equal the exploits of his father. This son she distrusted. She looked at him, so happily asserting his newfound status over his father, and her beloved brother cringed before the boy. He was that brave, to do even that to preserve the unity of the pack. But that boy needed a lesson. Her hackles rose and she shoved against him. He was a big, strapping boy of 3. His eyes glinted with humour. Very well, let him laugh. She demanded that he roll. He did it, willingly enough, too willingly. That was the final straw. She grabbed the loose flesh of his neck and bit it hard. He gasped in surprise. Very good. Let him think that a mother would kill her son. She bade him rise, and he scrambled up, contrite. His eyes were wide, his face full of pain. Blood oozed down his neck. His sister came up beside him and stood staring at her mother. Oh, very good. She's loyal. She moved off a little way. There were many hurts in her heart. Her youngest son was dead, her brother humiliated. She herself was forced into leadership at a desperate moment. It was hard for her to accept that her boy was really dead. Oh, he had been bright and eager, brimming with life, and he'd been so fast and strong, the fastest pup they had ever seen. He was a fine, good male, and he loved his life. Her brother came close, motioning, "Have confidence." His eyes sparkled. He didn't even appear sad. He nodded. "You must now take my heavy burden. Have confidence in yourself. I do. I trust you." These words moved her deeply. She knew that he was relinquishing his pride, his very life, to prevent discord among the members of the pack. They rubbed muzzles for a long time, their eyes closed, their tongues touching gently. This parting would be the first time they had not shared life totally. Abruptly, she turned and trotted away. She could not stay longer with him, or she would never turn away again. Full of sadness, she returned to the 3 children. She came up to them, exuding an impression of affability and confidence that she did not feel. Using the language of movements and growls, she outlined the plan of the coming night. It was not original. All it involved was returning to the woman's place and awaiting any chance that might befall. No better plan presented itself, however. The wonderfully canny ideas of her brother had resulted in the death of a member of the pack at no gain. She knew that time was running very short for them. The truth was that they were about to lose this hunt. Man would learn about his hunter, and the greatest of all taboos would be broken. The consequences for their race were monstrous. They must not fail. Must not. Sam Garner watched the 2 detectives and their friend rush into the apartment building. "Unbelievable," he said to Fields, his photographer. "Let's have some ideas about what's going on." Well, they shot a dog over at the museum. Was that a dog? Are you sure? Well, it looked like it. It ran like hell, even though it must have taken a couple of slugs. Garner turned back, and they reached the area where the encounter had taken place. There, in the snow, there were plain marks of paw prints, and there was an area spotted with blood and little clots of meat. Farther on, over the fence, more could be seen. Sam Garner loped across the street to the stone wall that rings Central Park and saw what he was hoping to see, a long bloody scrape on the top of the wall. He called to Fields, who, cursing, helped him over the wall. At once, everything changed. There he saw the little red traces lying in the snow, and at least 3 sets of paw prints. A pack of wild dogs running from 2 trigger-happy detectives. Well, this was getting interesting. He followed the tracks further, then stopped. Before him was a great smear of blood, and leading away from it were heavy splashes. He followed the trail, and came upon a place where many paws had ground away the sodden snow, and everything was bloody. "Oh, God," he whispered. Bits of meat and fur were scattered all around, lying half-frozen. Garner felt suddenly alone and afraid. He peered into the bushes around him. Were there shapes moving beyond the edge of visibility? This place had the sullen atmosphere of a crime scene, and it stank. "What in hell is this?" he said softly. "What in hell was going on here?" He backed away from the area slowly, carefully. He fought an impulse to turn and run, and instead walked as softly as he could through this savage, inhuman place. There was a powerful and monstrous presence about the spot, the blood, the bits of flesh, the horrible odor. It all combined to produce in Sam Garner an overwhelming dread. He moved faster, but he did not run. "Hey, Sam," came a distant voice. Garner heard it, but was afraid to answer. Something was near him, he was sure, keeping just out of sight, beyond the bushes. He broke into a trot, then a loping run. Then the wall was before him, too high to scale from this side. "Rich!" he shouted. "Rich!" The photographer looked down, his eyes opened wide, and he let out a scream. "Help me!" Garner shrieked. He grabbed frantically for Fields's hands and slowly clambered up the wall. "Good Christ, what in hell was that thing?" Fields babbled. "I don't know." "We got to get out of here." Fields ran to the car, Garner following weakly. He was sick with fear. He jumped into the car, slammed and locked the door. "What was it?" he whispered, then looked at Fields. Fields looked away. "Don't know. Lots bigger than a dog." Now he mumbled. "It had sort of a face." "Oh, good Christ. Describe it." "I can't." "Saw it only for a second." He shook his head. "No wonder those cops were trigger-happy. That thing came straight from hell, whatever it was." "Bullshit," Garner replied. He was regaining himself. Whatever it was real. Tasmanian devil, I don't know, but one thing is sure, it's on the loose in New York City, and it's damn well going to be big news. Mutilation, killing in the park, cops scared to be Jesus of something that looks like a dog. Then we get closer, and it ain't no dog that's spooking him. He stopped. A powerful image of that thing in the bushes near him, overcoming his pugnacity. Rich. There was a fucking bloodbath in there. Something got it bad there, man, and the smell, oh, holy Christ. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a fierce, inhuman face peering over the wall, so he put the car in gear and moved out. He headed for the Biltmore, and they slipped into a quiet booth in the bar. "What's going on, Sam?" Fields was insistent. He wasn't going to tell Garner, but he had gotten a good look at the thing that had been following the reporter. It had come out of the brush just as Sam reached the wall and had sat and watched him go. Then it saw Fields, and it simply disappeared. There had been a perfect picture there before the thing had taken off, but Fields hadn't taken a picture. For that second, he had been frozen, staring at the most horrible living thing that he had ever seen. But it all happened so fast. "What was it?" he asked. "How the hell do I know? It was something weird." "Did it kill Evans?" "Oh, sure. And it was responsible for the bloody bench the cops found this AM, too. It's a monster living in the park. Monster stalks park. There's no proof, except what we might have seen. That won't work in the Post, will it?" Fields nodded slowly. "I'll tell you what we got, though," Garner continued. "We got some kind of holy terror loose in this town, and the police are scared to make that fact public." Fields smiled. "Now that's going to be a beautiful story, Sam. Yeah, if we live through it." The human had come snooping along, following the blood trail. He had kept hurrying along, oblivious to the fact that the old father was never more than 6 feet away. The rest of the pack had moved off, only the old father lingering behind. He heard the scrape and thud of the human dropping over the wall. As he got closer to the spot where the boy had died, the old father stifled an urge to kill him. Here was another human meddling in the affairs of the pack, further evidence that the knowledge of the clan was spreading. The human sensed something and turned, running along with the old father just behind. He was in a fever to kill this human, but he knew that this would be a mistake. Oh, they could not risk so much killing, and the man had only seen blood. The snow melt would wash most of it away before more humans could be brought to this place. Also, the pack was not here to help dispose of a body. Then the man was at the wall, screaming for help. A pale face appeared above the wall. For an instant, the old father met the eyes of this human. Looking into human eyes was a little like looking into the eyes of an old enemy, or even a beloved sister. He should not be here. Run! He disappeared into the brush. His mind spun with the terrible knowledge that another intruder had come and was alternately relieved and guilty that he had not killed the thing. With the appearance of this new factor, the stranger who sought the lair of the pack, came the proof that the forbidden knowledge was spreading. It had to be stifled at the source, and soon. Tonight, he thought as he trotted, or it will be too late. The last light had disappeared from the sky when Becky opened her eyes. Beyond the bedroom door she heard the drone of the evening news. Dick, Wilson, and Ferguson were there, watching. She rose, then pulled on her thermal underwear, then threw on jeans, a flannel shirt, and a heavy sweater. Becky walked into the living room. "Welcome to the real world," Dick said. "You missed the show." "Show?" "Yeah, the commissioner announced that Evans was killed by a gang of nuts. Cult murder." Wilson waved a copy of the news. "Werewolf killers stalk park. 2 dead." Becky didn't comment. So ridiculously confused, so mindless, the commissioner just couldn't grasp the truth, and none of them could. "Dr. Ferguson," she asked, "what's your opinion of all this?" He smiled a little. "I think we better get our proof." He felt for his notes on Boiver's hand singles, ready in case his memory slipped. "He means we've run out of time," Wilson said. "So what else is new? Anybody hungry?" They ordered 2 pizzas and ate ravenously. Becky made a last-minute check of the equipment, the camera and the 2 walkie-talkies. The plan was to stake out the roof and man it in relays. 1 would go upstairs to keep the chance of being scented minimized. The 3 in the apartment would keep in touch via walkie-talkies. Becky's eyes went to the camera. They'd all handled it earlier, getting used to the overly sensitive controls. How soldiers ever got used to it in battle was beyond understanding. It was terribly delicate, but it worked miraculously well when it worked. Becky was first. They had divided the hours into 4 2.5-hour segments. Becky first and Ferguson next. He had wanted to take his watch in the alley where he could confront Wolfen, as he called them, personally, but he had been overruled. The 3rd watch was to be Dick's. This was the most likely time for the night's attempt. Dick had insisted, saying that he was the best choice, the strongest and the most fit. Becky couldn't deny it. She and Wilson were exhausted, and Ferguson had shown signs of cracking. She went into the bedroom and pulled on a heavy cardigan, gloves, and her pea-jacket. She dropped an electric pocket warmer into the jacket, then pulled on a fur cap. She returned to the living room, where they tested the walkie-talkies. They went over the signals again, 1 dot every 5 minutes, 2 if they wanted to go to voice, 3 if help was needed. Instead of talking, they planned to use the mic button. That would keep the noise down. Wilson pulled her aside. He glanced over her shoulder. Dick and Ferguson were busy fiddling with the camera. The concern in Wilson's eyes touched Becky deeply. He kissed her a long moment on the mouth. "I love the hell out of you," he said in an undertone. She smiled, put a finger to her lips, then went into the dining room. She took the camera from Dick and picked up a thermos of coffee. "Wait a minute, kid. You forgot the Ingram." "I'm not taking it." "You damn well are. I've got my .38. I don't want the Ingram." "Take the fucking thing, Becky." She took it from him. His mouth trembled as he gave it to her. They said nothing. There was nothing more to be said. They all went up to the roof. Wilson opened the door, and a brutal gust of ice-cold wind poured in on them. Becky barely felt it. She tromped out onto the roof and nearly fell flat. The snow had melted and become a layer of ice. She pushed the door closed and was, at once, plunged into a dark and alien world. The roof was flat and square, and she went down on all fours, crawling toward the dark edge of the roof overlooking the alley. The wind rocked her prone body, the cold ripping into her like fire against her skin. She kept telling herself she was crazy, that there was no way to endure this for more than a few minutes, but she went on, dragging herself to the edge of the roof. She reached it and touched the concrete lip and paused. The lip was about 3 inches high, a bare handhold. She pulled into position, her face at the lip of the roof. Before her was an empty expanse that plunged into dark, and above that the glimmering lights of midtown Manhattan. Clumsily she maneuvered the camera before her face, felt for the button, and turned it on. Immediately the readout jumped into the viewfinder and she focused. The alleyway swam into view, uncannily bright and detailed. Now she pulled the camera back and drew the walkie-talkie around to her face. Clumsily she turned it on. This would be the only voice transmission, and she didn't want it to last any longer than it had to. For all she knew, they were out there somewhere right now, watching and waiting. Wilson answered, and they tested signals. Then there was silence. In 5 minutes, Wilson would signal once, and she would reply with the same. So it would go for the next 2.5 hours, ensuring that the cold wind would not lull her into sleep. She thought of the men together in the apartment and hoped that they kept away from each other. She repositioned the camera and made a sweep of the alley, peering through the viewer. Nothing. The wind pulled at her mind on the ragged edge. It was going to be a long and brutal watch. The first signal came through and she replied, then made another sweep and again bowed her head. This continued through the watch. She occasionally got up, stomped until she made sure her feet were unfrozen. Each sweep revealed the same scene, an empty street and a few parked cars. Then she noticed one of the cars. It was double-parked, and it looked like an NYPD unmarked car. It could only be a stakeout. Then the wind would hit her again, and she crawled precariously back to the edge of the alley-side roof. Let them stake the place out, God damn them. They were watching Dick. When you thought about it, it was almost funny. "You're through, kid," came Wilson's voice. She buzzed back and immediately retreated to the doorway. It seemed like an eternity had passed up there. They were waiting for her in the stairwell. Ferguson was bundled up now. She passed the equipment to him and told him about the wind. He nodded, silent. The scientist slammed through the door. The brutal conditions hit him harder than he had expected. He struggled to keep his balance, slipped and collapsed against the door. The whole thing was such a farce. Instead of hiding up here, they should be down in the alley under spotlights, making the open-handed gesture of friendship from Beauvois's diagrams. He tried to move and fell hard. He struggled onto his stomach and began calling them. This roof was beyond his capabilities. Despite the others, he was going to have to take his chances with communication in the alley. When Becky returned from taking a hot shower, Dick was suiting up. "Just hang on, buddy," Wilson was saying over the radio. "Neff's going to be up in a minute and you can come down." Becky flared. "That little creep! You leave him where he is." "I ain't hurrying, honey," Dick said mildly. "He's been whining ever since he got up there. We need that little bastard. We can't take his time." "We got to. We'll split it up. Then Dick does his full shift, then I do mine." "He's not in shape," Dick said. "None of you are except me." "Okay. So how's about you take his shift and yours too? 5 hours. That sound good?" "That would be convenient, wouldn't it, honey?" What in the name of God did he mean? He couldn't possibly suspect that there was anything between her and Wilson. There wasn't. At least, very little. She decided not to pick up on it. The three went up to the roof and relieved Ferguson. Nobody spoke. They just took the equipment and got Dick checked out. The door to hell opened and closed again, and Dick was gone. Once in the apartment, Ferguson began picking up his things. That roof was too much for me, but I'll make it up to you. I'll do what I should have done in the first place. He slipped out of the door. "Don't let him," Wilson murmured. "Yeah, don't let him." But neither one of them moved. Maybe he was going to die, and maybe he wasn't. It was his risk, and he had chosen it. We should have stopped him. How? He's a determined man, brave too, even if he couldn't handle the roof. Signal Dick. Let's get started. "White male about 35, exiting building," said one of the two plainclothesmen who were sitting in a car in front of the building. "No, it ain't Neff." The two cops didn't watch Ferguson as he rushed past the front of the building and turned the corner. If they had, they would have seen what happened when he turned that corner. They were waiting there, under cars. They had placed themselves just inside the alley. This way they could hear both the front door and back, and, at the same time, watch the apartment. When they heard familiar footsteps crunching on the snow, they were filled with eagerness. The pack was angry, hungry to kill. When they came out from under the cars, Ferguson stopped. They could smell fear thickly about him. It would be an easy kill. He spread his hands in the palms-up gesture he had seen in the ancient book. They took their time getting positioned. He looked into their faces. Despite his fear, he was fascinated by them. Cruel, enigmatic, strangely beautiful. They stepped toward him, stopped again. "I can help you," he said softly. 3 of them executed the attack, while the 4th kept watch. He was dead, his body rolled under a car within 5 seconds. Their race long ago had forgotten its ancient relationship with man. His hand signals meant nothing at all to them. The 4 of them literally tore him apart in their fury, ripped at him in a frenzy of rage. They were the mother, the second mated pair, and the female of the 3rd. Old father had disappeared, but he was nearby, older, cannier, and more sensitive than the others. He knew how desperate the situation had become. He was determined to right the wrong he had done to his pack, even at the cost of his life. Now, although he was unable to see them, he heard their attack. Oh, they act from fear, he thought. They need strength and courage. And he resolved to help them. He had been aware of a human presence on the roof of the building, and took care to stay close to the wall, out of the line of sight from above. He went to the front of the building and waited. A few minutes later, a pedestrian came along, opened the door to the building. He ran in, past her. "Hey! A dog, damn it, Charlie! I let in a dog. Oh, I'll get it, jeez. It's moving!" He raced to the stairs and went up. He knew exactly where he was going. He recognized his danger, and how it would probably end. But he owed this to the pack he loved. Dick Neff cursed out loud when he felt the cold. Becky was one hell of a girl to have endured this for 2 goddamn hours. He was proud of her. There hadn't been a single peep of complaint. A person like that humbled you, hell, awed you. She was a total pro, no question about that. He crawled slowly and carefully, not liking how the wind made him slide. 30 stories was a long goddamn drop. He went over. Well, you'd have time to think about it on the way down. Plenty of time. Oh, he hated heights like this. In his nightmares, he always fell, and lately he'd been falling a lot. It was as if he had been here before, crawling toward this precipice. No wonder Ferguson had caved in so fast. He went to where Becky had been lying. First, the equipment check. Then the camera sweep. A voice check, and Dick settled in as best he could. He was making another sweep when he heard a muffled bang behind him. The door? He turned. It stood 10 feet away. It was breathing hard, as if it had just run up the stairs. He jumped to his feet, snapping away with the camera. Then it moved, and he hurled the camera at it. It wasn't attacking, probably because he was so close to the edge that a direct assault would send them both over. It moved quickly, now parallel with him. He was going for the Ingram when it jumped him. He lurched sideways, slipping on the ice, and found himself half over the edge. But so was the werewolf, just a few feet away, so close that he could see its face. Oh, they hung there, it with its forepaws dug into the icy edge, he hanging by his arms. Its eyes bore into his with a look of hatred more terrible than he had ever seen before. The eyes darted about, seeking the crucial advantage that would kill Dick Neff, leaving the werewolf alive. Carefully, Dick brought an arm down toward the .38 in his pocket. This was his only chance. He wanted so desperately to live, not to fall. The concrete lip was all that held him there, and it held him now only by one arm. The creature tried to pull itself up, failed, and hung still. It bared its teeth and made a low, horrible noise. Its face suddenly registered understanding. Now it began to slide along the ledge toward him, inch by inch, closing the gap between them. With only one arm, Dick could do no more than stay where he was. He sobbed aloud. Waves of fatigue poured through his arm on which his life was hanging. Now the thing was so close he could smell its fetid animal odor, see its savage teeth working. He pulled the gun up, fired, felt an agony in his arm, tried to pull the trigger again, but there was nothing to pull. He looked at the arm. His hand was not there. Blood was pouring out and steaming in the cold. And with horror-struck eyes he saw his hand, still clutching the .38, dangling in the creature's mouth. Then his death began. As his fall started, he felt fear. Then something else, a vast and overwhelming sadness so great it was a kind of exaltation. His body bounced on the hard ice off the alley, and he died instantly. A few moments later, his hand slammed into the ground beside him. Far above, the old father was in a death struggle of his own. He had barely cut the hand off as the gun fired. There was a searing pain in his head, an eye closed. The bullet had passed there, grazing his eye and forehead. His own forelegs were tiring, and he could not lift himself up without risking a fall. But he didn't want to lift himself. He had seen the highest of the balconies not far away. He worked his way over and dropped down to it. When he landed, he stood dazed, shaking his head. The eye did not work. Oh, very well. He would complete this task with only one eye. He was going to save his family and save the secret of his race. He knew it now. He was going to win. He climbed down the balconies painfully, wounded more seriously than he could know, until he got to the one balcony that mattered. He crouched there, inhaling the filthy smell of the two that were left alive, just the other side of the glass. "Hey, Becky, I got a problem. He's not picking up on the signal." Wilson tried again. "Maybe there's some interference. I'll go out on the balcony, get a better line. Oh, we better go up to the roof. It won't take a minute." "Look, I'll just go outside." "We're going up right now. Get your coat on." He complied. Now that she was making their command decisions, he seemed to be returning to normal. Fine by her, she'd trade her stripes for his bars any time. They moved to the roof, drew their guns, and Becky looked to where Dick should be, but wasn't. A pang of fear made her heart pound. She took a deep breath and called him. Nothing answered. Then she saw the camera. Slipping and falling, she went and retrieved the shattered thing. She wanted to be sick. Something's happened to him. Let's get inside. Her heart screamed at her to go to the alley to save her husband, but if he was there, he was most certainly beyond saving. She wanted to weep, but instead pressed on. We'll go back to the apartment and look over the balcony. Maybe this damn camera will work enough to let us see what's on the ground down there. They returned to an apartment that was already ceasing to be a home. If Dick had fallen, his body must have sailed right past these windows while they were trying to get him on the walkie-talkie. She examined the camera. All you could see through the viewer was a white blur. "Oh, it's total," she said. "At least the film's intact. He took 6 shots." Talking made her throat constrict. She stood silent and went over the possibilities. He'd been attacked by a werewolf on the roof and had fallen. That was number 1. A distant number 2 was that he had somehow escaped and jumped onto the topmost balcony. Highly unlikely. If he'd been able to jump down there, so could the werewolf. Wilson came to her. "He's had it, baby," he said gruffly. His eyes were wet. "Maybe he's in that alley bleeding to death." She knew it was irrational even as she said it. "I'll go look, Becky," he said. He went to the balcony, pushed aside the curtains. He failed to notice the shape huddled against the glass almost at his feet. He rolled back the sliding door. It leaped at him through the curtains, ripping the cloth. Wilson fell back into the living room, rolled, and headed for the bedroom. Becky was behind him as the thing pulled the curtains down, shook free, and came into the apartment. Becky and Wilson reached the bedroom, slammed and locked the door behind them. The plywood cracked and popped, but the door held. Becky fought her panic. "Did you see? Its brains are all out. It's been horribly hurt." "That must be Dick's doing." The door groaned. Now the beast began throwing itself against it. "Shoot it! Shoot through the door!" She got her own .38 and aimed it where she estimated the creature's chest would be and pulled the trigger. There was a deafening blast, and a smoking hole splintered the door. "You missed," Wilson said. "Look!" Through the 2-inch hole in the door she could see grey fur. She raised the gun again, but the creature retreated at once. "It moved to avoid the shot," Wilson said. "There's no use trying again. We aren't doing the door much good." Outside the door, the old father moved cautiously. He'd avoided the shot just in time and could still feel a hot sensation where it had passed his face. His head throbbed terribly. He fought for control, found it, and forced himself to think about the situation. The most important thing was that he was in. The next thing was to get the rest of the pack up here. He wasn't sure they would come if he called them, but he knew that the sounds of a fight would certainly get them climbing up. Very well. He leapt into the living room, letting his hatred for his tormentors be vented in destruction. Then he stopped, ears cocked, and there it was. The clatter of toes and the grunts of struggle. Oh, how he loved them. He felt hope not only for them, but for his whole race. Soon all packs everywhere would again be safe from human interference. For their safety, he was going to trade his life. They rushed in, their faces full of the lust of victory. When they saw him, they stopped. He knew a mortal wound when he felt it. He was glad to give his life for them. Now, they knew it. He communicated to his family that the 2 behind the door had a gun, and that the door must be burst. He would be first to take the impact of the gun. His mate looked pleading at him. He reminded her that he was already as good as dead. This last act would be useful to the pack. Inside the bedroom, Becky and Wilson listened closely. "Yet now they're all out there," Wilson whispered. "How many shots have you got left?" 5. "They better count." It was obvious to them that 5 shots would not be enough. "We won't make it," he said softly. "We'll make it, you bastard, if you don't give up hope." Wilson tried to kiss her cheek. "Your timing stinks." "It's probably my last chance." The old father gathered the pack. Nobody questioned him. Nobody dared. He had gotten them this far. He brought them all to attention. There was deep sorrow, and a final respect for his strength and effort. "You hear anything?" Becky asked. "They're in the living room. Maybe we could make a break. We wouldn't get 3 feet. Just stay put and think." Becky had an idea. She pulled the mattress from the bed, got a pen, and wrote a rough message. "Send armed cops 16G. Murder. Careful of ambush." Becky stationed Wilson at the door with a .38, wrapped her arm, and broke the window. Together they shoved the mattress through the window. It tumbled end over end to the sidewalk. Then came a scratching at the door. "Get that dresser over there." "Move it." Wilson obeyed, and as he shoved it against the door, there was a tremendous bang. "Lean against the dresser," Becky commanded, and the door shook with the onslaught of the strength behind it. The 2 policemen on the street heard the thud when the mattress landed. "Yeah, something hit the sidewalk." "Yeah? You curious?" "No." "Me neither." They settled back to wait. The door smashed into pieces. One of the creatures was there, pulling itself over the dresser. Becky shot it as it leaped at her and dropped to the floor. Wilson scrambled to his feet. Despite its head wound and the 2-inch hole in its chest, the thing jumped on him, clawing him viciously. He screamed in agony. She shot again. The thing limped away from Wilson. Wilson started to stagger away, his whole front streaming with blood. She stumbled to help him, and a paw grabbed at her ankle. Agony pierced her leg, and she shrieked. She wanted to shoot it, but she did not. The bullets must be saved. Then the grip faded. She slumped back against the bed frame, pointing her pistol at the 4 apparitions gathered at the door. They were obviously unsure about her weapon. She had 2 shots left. Wilson, huddled and moaning, was beyond helping her. She was alone and in agony, fighting unconsciousness. Downstairs, a patrol car pulled up. "Help you?" the doorman asked. "Yeah, we got a call about a disturbance, 16th floor." The man shrugged, and the cops headed for the elevator. This looked like a standard family disturbance situation. No arrest, just a lot of argument and maybe a little fight to break up. Half their time was spent on this stuff. Real crime? Oh, forget it. The elevator arrived at the 16th floor. The cops looked up and down the hall. It was quiet. They headed for 16G. The creatures were watching Becky, peering over the edge of the dresser. She wasn't fast enough to get off a shot at those darting heads. Then they became quiet. They would jump right over the dresser at her throat. She was sure of that. She hobbled to the window, wishing she could somehow protect Wilson, who had passed out, but she couldn't. If the creatures came at her, she planned to jump. It was preferable, 1,000 times, to disembowelment by those monstrosities. The doorbell rang. One of the creatures sailed across the dresser, its teeth bared. It took Becky's last 2 slugs in the muzzle and dropped at her feet. The body hunched, then it collapsed into a widening pool of blood. Becky watched it with a mixture of horror and sadness. She looked across the carnage in the room. 3 hideous faces still stared at her. She balanced herself against the windowsill, the wind threatening to make her fall. She raised the gun, and the creatures hesitated. Then one of them made a low, strange sound, almost of grief. Suddenly, all 3 disappeared below the edge of the dresser. "Police!" cried a young voice. Don't open that door! Police, open up! Stay out!" The door flew open, and 2 cops didn't even have a chance to scream. All Becky heard was a series of thuds. Then there was silence. Becky was crying now. She sank to the bed. Any moment now the werewolves would be back to kill her. "Hey, what's going on in here?" She looked up. 2 patrolmen were standing there with guns drawn. I've got a wounded man in here," she whispered. The patrolmen pushed the dresser aside. Ignoring the 2 werewolves, one of them went to Wilson while the other called on his radio. "He's breathing." "What's the story, lady? What the hell are those?" "Werewolves." Becky heard herself from far, far away. Strong arms eased her to the bed. In the distance, there were sirens and voices murmuring. Somebody was beside her, a half-smile on his face. "Hello, Mrs. Neff. Do you want to make a statement to the press?" "Oh, you're the man from the Post, aren't you?" "I'm Garner, ma'am." She closed her eyes as they lifted her to a stretcher and wheeled her away. Garner hurried along beside her. "It's a big story, isn't it?" he said breathlessly. "A big story," she said. Sam Garner smiled again, elbowed his way into the crowded elevator. Her leg throbbed. She was exhausted, and she just wanted to forget. But she gave Garner his story. Their mother jumped as soon as the gun had been emptied into their father. She would make the kill. Then the 4 of them would destroy their father's body. Then the incredible happened. The gun crashed again, and their mother was also killed. They stood staring at the monster who had killed their parents, too stunned to move. It sat there, waving its gun, and the gun smelled hot and deadly. Then there was a sound outside the door, more humans approaching, and the sharp, nasty scent of guns was upon them also. The 3 young Wolfen turned to face this new threat. The door burst open and they prepared to kill whatever appeared there. But it was 2 young males, dressed as those at the dump had been dressed. All of this agony had begun when 2 such had been killed. They would not repeat the mistake. They ran past the 2 policemen into the hallway. Now the bodies of their parents would be left behind for men to see. But this could not be helped. They bolted down the hall and ran down the stairs. They raced across the lobby, smashing the glass front door and running on, ignoring the shouts and the cuts they had received. They ran through the empty city, moving farther and farther north, not stopping until they reached the dark banks of the Harlem River. They had come to a well-hidden place marked safe by the scent of the pack that roamed this area. All felt a terrible sense of loss. Their parents were dead. The pack they knew was ended. Worse was the fact that Wolfen bodies had been left in the hands of man. They felt loss, but not defeat. What burned in their hearts was hard, unquenchable defiance. They howled. The sound echoed up and down the banks of the river. High above them, on a bridge, a repair crew was working. When they heard the sound, the men stared wordlessly at one another. They looked over the railing, but saw nothing in the darkness below. Then the howl was answered, keening on the wind as pack after pack looked up from their haunts and responded to the powerful sense of destiny that the sound awakened in them all. Copyright 1990, Dove Books on Tape, Incorporated.